Chapter 9:21. Because of Lei Xiaoyu's big heart, Qin Yu didn't continue using small tricks. He didn't want this little girl to be even more interested in him, so the rest of the journey was extremely smooth. With his sensing ability, besides breaking through the turbulent flows of space and being ambushed by that viper, he wouldn't be targeted if he tried to avoid it. Qin Yu's speed was extremely fast. Lei Xiaoyu blinked, hiding the smile in her eyes. She only occasionally swept her eyes around. She couldn't help but be curious as to where Qin Yu was going. 2 hours later, Qin Yu finally stopped. In front of him was a bottomless abyss, like a horrifying maw. After a moment of hesitation, Qin Yu said, "We're going down. Get on my back and hold on tight." Lei Xiaoyu sensed his caution. She didn't ask why. She climbed onto Qin Yu's back and grabbed onto his clothes. Qin Yu thought for a moment. He took out a silver whip made from an unknown material and tied it to Lei Xiaoyu. Then he took a deep breath and stepped into the abyss, allowing his body to rapidly sink. But he was very cautious. Every time he reached a certain speed, he would reach out a hand and press down on the cliff wall, causing his speed to slow down. The pitch-black abyss was as thick as ink. The darkness here wasn't ordinary at all. Even a cultivator's divine sense would be hindered, and the deeper they went, the heavier the hindrance became until it completely lost its effect. The cliff walls weren't as smooth as a mirror. There were large protrusions as well as dead trees and old vines. Lei Xiaoyu could only vaguely see their outlines as they passed by, and then she was ruthlessly tossed upwards. She didn't know what method Qin Yu used to not make any mistakes in the darkness. At this time, as she lay on his back, her hands wrapped around his neck, Lei Xiaoyu felt incomparably at ease. It was like the surrounding darkness and the bottomless abyss were no longer terrifying. As they descended, even though Qin Yu constantly slowed down, the depth they had sunk was already astonishing. But this abyss was like a gate to hell. They couldn't see the end. After an unknown period of time, Lei Xiaoyu suddenly felt a chill. Qin Yu thrust a hand into the cliff wall and stopped. Extreme movement and extreme stillness inevitably placed a tremendous pressure on his body. But his movements were smooth and natural, not even causing Lei Xiaoyu to feel too much of an impact. Lowering her head to look down, Lei Xiaoyu raised her hand to cover her mouth. Only then did she manage to stifle her cry of surprise. Her eyes were wide open. Tens of thousands of feet below, the darkness was dispelled a little by the faint light. There were some scattered shrubs. Perhaps because their living environment was too harsh, they were listless, causing the light they emitted to be much dimmer. But as long as there was light, it could pierce through the darkness. Lei Xiaoyu's eyes widened. This was because, under the illumination of the dim light, she saw the skeleton of an astonishingly large beast lying in the depths of the abyss. It was lying on the ground. Each of its ribs was like a bridge connecting the coast. Only a small part of it was illuminated by the light. Most of the giant beast's bones were hidden in the darkness. Everything she saw clearly told Lei Xiaoyu that the gigantic beast was already dead. However, for some reason, she felt a strong sense of threat when she looked at it. It was as if this giant beast that had been dead for countless years could come back to life at any moment and tear apart anyone who dared to approach it. Big brother Qin. Lei Xiaoyu shivered as she spoke. She felt even colder. Frost began to rapidly condense on her hair and eyebrows. Don't speak. Qin Yu didn't turn his head. I want to continue going down a little. If you are afraid, then close your eyes. A warm current gushed out from his body, instantly rescuing Lei Xiaoyu from her frozen state. Lei Xiaoyu nodded and closed her eyes, although her heart was racing. She didn't try to persuade Qin Yu to leave. This was because she was well aware that since Qin Yu had come here and wanted to continue going down, he must have his own reasons. Of course, this was also because the one carrying her was Qin Yu. Lei Xiaoyu believed in him. Taking a deep breath, Qin Yu continued downwards. He no longer rapidly sank down. Instead, he lay flat on the steep rock walls, slowly moving forward step by step. Kacha! Kacha! Tiny broken sounds constantly spread out in the darkness. This was the sound that came from the layers of black ice that had gathered on the surface of the rock walls. The moment Chinyu exhaled his breath, it froze into countless, incomparably tiny ice particles. With a rustling sound, they fell onto the surface of the rock walls and tumbled down. White frost spread across the surface of his body. But there seemed to be an invisible line that isolated the frost from the front of Chinyu, making it impossible for it to reach Lei Xiaoyu. Suddenly, Chinyu stopped where he was. He was like a stone that had fused into the rock walls. He could clearly hear Lei Xiaoyu's suppressed breathing. His intuition told him that this was the limit. If he continued deeper, something horrifying would occur. He turned his head and looked down. Because he had gone deeper, he was able to see even more clearly. Chinyu could now determine that this giant beast skeleton buried in the deep abyss was the bone beast he had seen on the night of the blood moon not too long ago. His eyes slowly moved and fell onto the giant skull of the bone beast. Half of its face was blocked by the boulder, revealing only one eye socket. Roar! Without warning, the roar of a giant beast exploded in his mind. Chinyu's eyes glazed over for a moment before they regained clarity in the next moment. He stuffily coughed and thrust his hands into the rock walls, forcefully stabilizing himself. In the next moment, without hesitation, Chinyu's hands gathered strength and his body soared upwards. Using his hands and feet, he was like a galloping horse, wildly galloping along the steep stone walls in the darkness. If someone could clearly see what was happening, they would discover that the surface of the rock wall behind Chinyu was covered in layers of ice. It was silent, but it was like the most terrifying predator in the world, stubbornly chasing after Chinyu. Whoosh! His figure shot into the skies, leaving the range of the abyss. Without hesitation, Chinyu continued to fly into the distance. Vaguely, he seemed to hear the angry and unwilling roar of a beast behind him. Lei Xiaoyu opened her eyes. What she saw was Chinyu. His face was covered in white frost, as if he had been sealed in ice. Looking at his clean back and how she hadn't been affected in the slightest, Lei Xiaoyu bit her lips, a complex look in her eyes. You clearly want me to distance myself from you, but you treat me so well. Big brother Qin, you really are a very contradictory person. Sensing Lei Xiaoyu's eyes, Chinyu stopped and placed her on the ground. He took a step forward, shaking off the white frost around him. He smiled and said, I only look distressed. It won't harm me at all. Lei Xiaoyu bit her lips. It was I who implicated big brother Qin. Chinyu waved his hand. Don't say that. There's only the two of us here. Without you accompanying me, I might not have dared to go down just now. Even though she knew this was a lie, Lei Xiaoyu still smiled. This was because she knew that Chinyu was trying to comfort her. Chinyu also smiled. Next, we need to go somewhere else. Don't worry, there won't be any dangers this time. I just want to confirm my own thoughts. Holding on to Lei Xiaoyu, Chinyu continued on his way. He could clearly feel his speed increase, as if he were in a rush. An hour later, in front of a pitch-black rock wall, Chinyu let go. He said, You can look around, but don't go too far. As he spoke, he walked in front of the rock wall. Looking at the bulges on the surface, he hesitated for a moment before placing his hand on them. Lei Xiaoyu obediently stood behind. She swept her eyes over the mountain wall. She didn't know what was in these bulges, but she could keenly feel a restless aura. Ah, big brother Qin, look. A moment later, Lei Xiaoyu suddenly cried out. Chinyu looked up and followed her finger. A sharp light flashed in his eyes. The originally flat rock wall was now slowly bulging out, as if a new fruit had just been born. Stepping forwards, Chinyu shot into the skies, arriving directly in front of this bulge. Without hesitation, he punched out. The rock wall's hardness surpassed his imagination. As his fist fell, only a few pieces of rubble fell off. Taking a deep breath, a dark gold light appeared in Qin Yu's eyes. The bulge in front of him became incomparably clear. Bang! Qin Yu punched out again. This time, there was an angry roar from the bulge. On the hard rock wall, with light cracking sounds, large cracks began to appear. With the third punch, the bulge was finally blown open, revealing the scene within. Qin Yu's pupils shrank. He saw that within the bulge was a developing embryo. Thick and dense black veins drilled out from deep within the rock wall, submerging into the body of the black-armored warrior in front of him. It was clear that this warrior hadn't fully developed yet. Only half of his wings had grown out, and the lower half of his body hadn't been covered by black armor. It was only at this time that Qin Yu realized that the black armor worn by the black-armored warriors wasn't a weapon they equipped, but something that grew from within their bodies. The rock wall was forcefully broken apart. The black-armored warrior was exposed beneath the dim light. As if he had been tossed into a pot of boiling oil, he emitted pained howls. The black armor that had grown over half began to rapidly rot away, turning into a thick black and red liquid that fell off. Qin Yu's complexion changed. As the black armor fell off, the black-armored warrior's face was revealed. This was the corpse of the cultivator that had been dragged away in the valley when the blood moon shined down upon the earth. It was actually him. Roar! The black-armored warrior crazily roared. His eyes were filled with cruelty and destruction as he glared at Qin Yu. A trace of fear erupted from the depths of his heart. Without hesitation, Qin Yu flew away from the rock wall. Without his obstruction, the broken rock wall wriggled and rapidly grew back, soon restoring itself to its original appearance. Lei Xiaoyu's eyes widened. Big brother Qin, this is... Qin Yu arrived at her side. I'll explain it to you later. We should leave now. Pulling Lei Xiaoyu up, he turned and rushed towards the dead tree. An hour later, the two of them shot into the skies. Space twisted and vanished, revealing the entrance to the tree hole. Pa! As his feet landed, Qin Yu let out a long breath. The fierce restlessness that lingered in his heart finally began to slowly dissipate. He looked back at the hesitant and puzzled Lei Xiaoyu. Qin Yu didn't say anything. He pointed outside and said, "Look." Lei Xiaoyu blinked her eyes. It was quiet outside. Nothing had changed since they had returned. What did Big Brother Qin want me to see? Chapter 922. The world turned dark, as if eternal night had arrived. If it weren't for Qin Yu being by his side and being able to hear his breathing, Lei Xiaoyu would have cried out in alarm. The entire world was swallowed up by darkness, as if she were alone in this world. The instant of fear and unsuppressible loneliness was enough to shatter the outer shell of most people. Luckily, this darkness didn't last for too long. A faint, blood-red light sprinkled down from the skies above. Lei Xiaoyu's eyes widened. She looked at the blood moon that appeared. Just a moment ago it hadn't been here, but now it had entered the skies. It gave off a feeling as if it had existed for tens of millions of years and would continue to exist like this. Big Brother Qin, this is... Qin Yu looked at the earth that was draped in blood once more. He slowly said, "It really is like this. A horror is about to arrive." He glanced at the peaceful blood moon in the skies, and his pupils shrank. This was because today's blood moon was rounder than before. This was likely to bring about some unknown and even more terrifying changes. Qin Yu never imagined that his speculations would be verified so quickly. When the tree hole shook, the withered ancient tree that supported the heavens revived once more. Whoosh! Whoosh! Countless dried branches turned into blood-red tentacles that held towards the hole. Lei Xiaoyu cried out in alarm, her complexion instantly paling. Qin Yu lifted a hand and pulled her behind him. In the next moment, the cut mark at the hole released a silver light, and the blood-red tentacles stopped once more. But at this time, Qin Yu frowned. He clearly remembered that the last time the blood moon appeared, these tentacles had stopped 100 feet from the hole. But today they had gone even deeper. Looking around, these tentacles were at most 70 to 80 feet away from the hole. Qin Yu swept his eyes over the silver cut mark at the hole and looked up at the brighter and rounder blood moon in the skies. A dignified look appeared in his eyes. Was this the reason? If the blood moon in this mysterious land also followed the law of the moon waxing and waning in the outside world, then the blood moon in the skies was still some distance away from perfection. In other words, if Qin Yu's guess was correct, then the following blood moons would descend several times until they reached perfection. The strength to revive the withered tree would become increasingly strong. Once the cut mark at the hole couldn't stop it, this temporary safe foothold would become a perilous situation. After circling around for a while, the tentacles retracted. Then, just like yesterday, the withered tree plucked out all of its roots and intertwined them into thick legs. With a rumbling sound, it rushed into the distance. Lei Xiaoyu finally recovered from her shock, her eyes filled with disbelief. Big Brother Qin, this tree is alive. It's actually alive. Qin Yu looked in the direction that the withered tree was moving. He knew that it was heading towards the mountain valley from yesterday. What followed next would be a scene of cruel and bloody slaughter. He thought for a moment and said, "Little fish, there might be some scenes that will make you uncomfortable. If you find it unacceptable, then seal off your 6 senses and stand behind me." Lei Xiaoyu pursed her lips. "I understand, Big Brother Qin." Just like the day before, Withered would begin to climb up the steep rock wall. Soon it reached the top of the mountain, and the huge valley appeared in front of it. The smell of blood in the air had completely disappeared, as if it had been completely absorbed by an invisible existence. After yesterday's slaughter, the number of cultivators and monster beasts had been reduced by nearly half. But now, their numbers had been restored to the scale Qin Yu had first seen. It was clear that this place wasn't sealed off. It was connected to the outside world, and only then could it continuously replenish its life force. As long as there was a channel, then it wasn't a danger zone. He could think of a way to leave, taking a step back, even if this was a danger zone. Qin Yu would still rely on his fists to punch his way out. Before he could think any further, his heart suddenly chilled as if he had been locked onto. Then, there was a heaven-shaking, rumbling sound in his ears. It fiercely turned its head. The bone beast's massive body was bathed in blood-red moonlight as it wildly raced forwards. It roared, and its giant, empty eye sockets stubbornly stared at Qin Yu. He could actually feel that its gaze had nearly condensed into essence, as well as a cruel killing intent that couldn't be washed away even if all the water in a river flowed into it. Withered would instantly responded. Its legs spread apart and countless roots drilled into the rock walls, stabilizing its body. At the same time, tens of millions of withered branches turned into countless tentacles that held forwards. Their speed was unimaginable, causing the air to explode with shrill screams. In that instant, the great beast collided with the tentacles. There was a heaven-shaking explosion, like a thunderclap. The tentacles that struck the great beast instantly disintegrated into countless pieces. But it clearly possessed an extremely strong regenerative ability. The broken parts wildly wriggled and regenerated, instantly restoring itself to its original state. Countless blood-red tentacles wildly twisted together, turning into a giant cage that firmly trapped the bone beast within. On the summit, the battle between the withered wood and the bone beast attracted the attention of all around. The eyes of these terrifying life forms that had been resurrected beneath the blood moon began to shine with a ghostly light. Roar! With a loud roar, the bone beast tore apart the blood-red tentacles. It didn't continue to rush forwards. After glaring at Qin Yu, it turned and returned to its original position, rearing its head back and roaring into the heavens. Beneath the blood moon, the surface of its damaged bones began to regenerate at a speed visible to the naked eye. After several breaths of time, it was completely restored. The attention that gathered on the summit rapidly shifted away, falling back into the mountain valley. The withered wood didn't retract its roots that were inserted into the summit. It was like a great tree that had grown here for countless years. It had enough strength and confidence to withstand the baptism of wind and rain. Qin Yu was secretly startled. Yesterday, he had already expected that these terrifying life forms that climbed up to the summit to feast on his blood energy would be extremely strong. But today, he truly experienced the destructive strength they possessed. Beneath the blood moon, they seemed to be able to obtain a terrifying increase in strength. The strength they could erupt with far surpassed Qin Yu's imagination. In Qin Yu's mind, the danger level of this world instantly rose by several levels. Lei Xiaoyu said with a pale face, "Big Brother Qin, this bone beast seems to be the one we saw in the underground abyss." Qin Yu nodded. "That's right, that's it. What you are seeing now is something I experienced yesterday. It is because I can't understand it that I want to find the closest bone beast to us and unravel the secret of its resurrection." As he spoke to hear, he shook his head. It was clear that these terrifying life forms that could only live beneath the blood moon, even if they were in a dead state, weren't so easily destroyed. Otherwise, the cultivators and monster beasts that were desperately trying to survive in the mountain valley would have already thought of a way to help them fall into eternal slumber while they were sleeping. Lei Xiaoyu looked towards the mountain valley, at the massive number of cultivators and monster beasts that were waiting for a great enemy. What are they waiting for? Qin Yu was silent for a moment. "I think they are waiting for the true terror of this world." Just as his voice fell, there was no need for him to explain any further. This was because bulges had already begun to appear on the rock walls. As the blood moon shined brighter and brighter, one could clearly see them. The bulges split open and black-armored warriors walked out, sabers in hand. Without hesitation, they flapped their wings and howled as they rushed forwards. All of them opened their eyes. There was no emotion in them, only endless cruelty, slaughter, and destruction. Although he had already witnessed this once, Qin Yu was still shocked as he saw the brutal, direct, and crazy scenes of slaughter in the mountain valley again. If one fell into this sort of slaughter, then, unless they possessed absolute strength, even a fierce tiger would exhaust all of its strength and eventually die on the spot. Beside him, Lei Xiaoyu subconsciously held onto Qin Yu's arm, her body constantly shivering. If she weren't leaning against Qin Yu, she feared she would have already fallen to the ground. Perhaps she had heard that her father and brother had experienced a battlefield far more bloody and cruel than this one. But the impact of hearing about it and seeing it with her own eyes was 10 times or even 100 times worse. Smelling the thick scent of blood in the air, Lei Xiaoyu held onto Qin Yu even tighter. This wasn't because she was timid, but because of her instinctive fear of death. Qin Yu lifted a hand and placed it in front of her frozen eyes. He said in a soft voice, "Don't be afraid. We are safe here. If you really can't forget this scene, then consider it a more realistic nightmare." He lifted a hand and gently pressed it against Lei Xiaoyu's neck. Her tense body relaxed, and she fell into Qin Yu's arms. He placed her on the ground. As he saw her frown, even though she was unconscious, Qin Yu sighed inwardly. Since he was in purgatory, there were some things he had to know. He didn't know when he would be able to leave or what sort of situation he would encounter in the future. Lei Xiaoyu would eventually have to face these things. Qin Yu sat down cross-legged beside Lei Xiaoyu, letting her subconsciously hold onto his hand. His eyes fell on the cut mark at the entrance of the cave. From what he saw in the mountain valley and how the withered tree retreated after attacking, all of this proved that this cut mark emitted a powerful deterrent to the terrifying life forms that revived beneath the blood moon. It made it so that they didn't dare to take another step forward. If he could control this strength, then the purgatory in front of him would naturally become safe. Even these terrifying life forms would become nothing more than chickens and dogs in Qin Yu's eyes. Of course, controlling this strength wasn't simple at all. Otherwise, Could it be that no one had thought of this point after this world had existed for countless years? Qin Yu didn't believe that he was smarter than most people, since these terrifying life forms still controlled the world covered by the blood moon. It was clear that the strength contained within this cut mark was still a secret. And what Qin Yu wanted to do now was unravel this secret. If he were an ordinary cultivator, that would be nothing more than wishful thinking. But after refining the jade embryo egg, Qin Yu's level had already far surpassed that of an ordinary person. Looking at the cut mark in front of him that quietly emitted a silver light, a faint thought appeared in Qin Yu's mind. If he could smoothly unravel the secret contained within this cut mark, he would have a great harvest. He took a deep breath and suppressed the eagerness in his heart. Now wasn't the time. Who knew what consequences would occur once he tried to unravel it? If there was an accident and this cut mark was destroyed, then his fate would be incomparably miserable. After another 24 hours of crazy slaughter, the black-armored warrior brought the corpses of his companions, cultivators, and monster beasts away like a tide. After dividing up enough blood energy, the 12 terrifying life forms on the mountain peak were satisfied. Then they turned and left. Qin Yu didn't bother with the bone beast. Before it left, it swept its cruel and murderous gaze over him. He opened his eyes and looked up at the skies above. The blood moon would soon disappear, and the time for the shrubs to illuminate the world would soon arrive. He had 24 hours of safety to unravel the secret of this cut mark. Rumble, rumble. Madly rushing forwards, the withered tree returned to its original spot and took root. Just as it had appeared, the blood moon vanished without a trace. Chapter 9:23. In fact, besides unraveling the secret of the cleave mark, Qin Yu had an even better choice. That was to pierce through the seal of this world and open a path to leave. That way he could avoid all the dangers. Unfortunately, he had already tried this before. Although he could vaguely see some veins and lines, even though his eyes were red and swollen with tears, he hadn't been able to find the true path. The blood moon was constantly becoming rounder. This likely meant that the terrifying life forms that were shrouded in it would become increasingly powerful. Qin Yu didn't dare to take this risk. This was because he didn't have enough confidence that he could find a way out before the blood moon reached full circle. At that time, if he was lucky, he might be able to survive, but Lei Xiaoyu would definitely be killed. This wasn't a guess, but a 100% certainty. One of Qin Yu's strengths was that he was able to maintain a calm and objective understanding of his own abilities. Thus, he chose to unravel the cleave mark. Of course, there was also a reason for this, and that was because he could feel that there were great benefits contained within the cleave mark. If he could unravel the secret, then he could obtain benefits. Lei Xiaoyu had already woken up. She didn't blame Qin Yu for knocking her unconscious, because the scene she saw at the time had already reached the limit of what she could bear. If she continued to look, she would definitely be left with a psychological shadow that she would never be able to erase for the rest of her life. Qin Yu spoke a few simple words to her. He did mention that the moon was gradually becoming rounder and that this world was becoming increasingly dangerous. He only told Lei Xiaoyu that he was interested in the cleave mark and hoped that she could perceive the strength contained within it. Nearly half of the 24 hours that the shrub illuminated the world had passed. Qin Yu had been observing the cleave mark this entire time. It wasn't that he didn't want to personally touch it or sense the strength within it, but that he could clearly feel that the hidden strength circulating within the cleave mark was in an exquisite balance. If an external force came into contact with it, this balance would be broken. The only result would be that the cleave mark would self-destruct and lose all of its power. Before he could find a safe place to stay, Qin Yu couldn't accept such a result. Thus, he could only observe and not touch it. But this didn't mean that Qin Yu didn't gain anything. On the contrary, during these 12 hours of observation, he had made an astonishing discovery. However, whether or not this was correct required further examination. Qin Yu let out a breath. He stood up and looked at Lei Xiaoyu. I'm going out. You stay here. Remember, no matter what, do not take a single step out of this tree hole before I return." Although the blood moon had yet to descend, it did not mean that this world was safe. This was because, apart from the terrifying creatures that had been resurrected by the blood moon, there were also many creatures struggling to survive. Whether it was human cultivators or demon beasts, once they discovered this safe tree hole that could temporarily hide from the terrifying blood moon, they would definitely seize it at all costs. Lei Xiaoyu nodded. "Big brother Qin, don't worry. I'll stay inside and wait for you to come back." She took a deep breath. "You must be careful." Qin, you could sense her nervousness, but there was a certain amount of risk involved in what he was about to do. He couldn't bring her along with him. "Don't worry. The blood moon will descend in 12 hours. I'll definitely rush back before then." He leapt down from the tree hole. In midair, he flicked his sleeves, and space twisted, covering up the tree hole. As he landed on the ground, he didn't pause at all. His figure flickered several times, and he vanished from sight. This time he had two goals in mind. The first was to find other slash marks to test whether or not his thoughts were correct. Although he knew that there were a massive number of slash marks in that mountain valley, it was precisely because there were far too many of them that once a problem arose, it was likely to cause a great deal of trouble. If there were any other choices, Qin Yu wouldn't have gone to the mountain valley. Moreover, taking a step back, that mountain valley was a place where countless lives depended on when the blood moon descended. Disregarding whether or not there were people guarding it, even if he could smoothly enter and experiment, once damage was caused at that time, every opening would swallow up countless lives when the blood moon descended. His own strength was limited. If he couldn't save them, then that was fine, but he didn't want to add fuel to the fire and make it more difficult for them to survive. His second goal was built on top of his first goal. Besides the tree hole, there was a second safe foothold. The blood moon became increasingly round. The slash marks at the entrance of the tree hole might not be able to hold on. And before that, Qin Yu didn't have absolute confidence he could unravel the secrets of the slash marks. In order to consider victory, he had to first consider defeat. He had to find a path of retreat for himself and Lei Xiaoyu. In 12 hours, excluding the time spent on the way back and forth, the area Qin Yu could search wasn't too large. First, he eliminated the possibility of investigating the abyss bone beast yesterday and the bulge in the rock wall. He had already noticed that there weren't any slash marks. For hours later, just as Qin Yu was frowning and considering whether or not he had to stop, a giant and withered skeleton appeared in his line of sight. It was truly withered and not like the abyss bone beast. Even if all that was left over were its bones, they would still be incomparably hard and contain an unknown power. With just a glance, Qin Yu could determine that this skeleton had thoroughly died. Even if the blood moon descended, it would still be impossible for it to revive. In this extremely dangerous and strange world, encountering any situation was normal. This was only a withered skeleton. It shouldn't have aroused Qin Yu's attention. But it was precisely because it had decayed that Qin Yu frowned. If the blood moon could revive dead beings, why couldn't it? Qin Yu's thoughts raced. He changed directions, and his figure howled. He landed beside the skeleton. Compared to the abyss bone beast, it was much smaller. Even so, it was nearly 10,000 feet tall. If this monster beast was still alive, then with all its flesh and blood, it would be a small moving mountain. Its aura would surely be astonishing. But now, its aura had completely dissipated. Besides being large, it didn't give off the least bit of deterrence. Qin Yu carefully swept his eyes over the beast bone. A dark golden light flashed in his eyes, and after several breaths of time he was overjoyed. With a flick of his sleeves, boundless strength gushed out from the void, sending the beast bone flying away. It tumbled in the air before collapsing and decomposing, turning into pale white bone powder that was wrapped up in strong winds and blown far away. At this time, Qin Yu's complexion changed. He suddenly felt a throbbing in his heart, but when he tried to sense it, it had already disappeared without a trace. With his current state, it was impossible for him to sense something for no reason. But there really wasn't anything strange about the giant beast bone in front of him. His thoughts raced several times. Qin Yu took a deep breath and suppressed his thoughts. Time was of the essence, and he couldn't delay any longer. Looking down, he saw that after the beast bone was sent flying away, a shallow slash mark had appeared where it had originally been. The slash mark was 3 inches deep and nearly a meter long. It had been covered by the skeleton, and if it weren't for Qin Yu's eyes being able to see straight to its source, he wouldn't have noticed it. A dark golden light surged in Qin Yu's eyes. He looked at the slash mark and then sighed. Although it was much longer than the slash mark at the entrance of the tree hole, it seemed to have consumed a great deal of strength. Now, there was only a shallow layer left. He feared that it would dissipate at the slightest touch, and he might not be able to complete his experiment. But at this time, he certainly couldn't give up. Whether or not he succeeded would depend on his luck. Qin Yu squatted down. He lifted a finger and slowly touched the slash mark. He closed his eyes. With his fingertip as a medium, he fused his mind into the slash mark. A moment later, there was a light cracking sound and Qin Yu's eyes shot open. The slash mark on the ground had directly shattered and vanished. In the blink of an eye, it had vanished without a trace, as if it had never appeared. Just a little bit more, and Qin Yu would have been able to grasp the key point. At this moment, even with his calm state of mind, he still couldn't help but feel anxious. He took several deep breaths before he was able to barely suppress it. Qin Yu stood up and drew back his hand. He looked down at his fingertip and saw that there was another slash mark on it. The flesh and blood wriggled as it repaired itself, but it split apart in the next moment. This was the destructive strength that overflowed out when the slash mark broke. Even though it was only an incomparably tiny bit, it contained such an astonishing might. At this moment, Qin Yu was even more determined to obtain the secret of the slash mark. There wasn't much time left. He had to hurry back. Qin Yu turned and left. His speed was even faster than when he came, and he soared straight towards the withered tree. There was still an hour until the blood moon descended. In the distance, Qin Yu could see the branches of the withered tree that supported the heavens. His heart relaxed a little, but in the next moment he tensed up. There was someone under the tree. When Qin Yu saw this person, the cultivator under the tree seemed to sense something. He turned around and their eyes met. Qin Yu's heart shrank and an irrepressible feeling of disgust surged out from his heart. He frowned. This feeling, when he was playing chess with Lei Xiaoyu at the City Lord Mansion, he had once felt it. Sparks exploded in Cui Yongji's eyes before he composed himself. He cupped his hands together and said, "My surname is Cui Yongji. Greetings, fellow Taoist." Qin Yu maintained his composure. He looked at the tree hole. The seal he left at the entrance was still intact, so Lei Xiaoyu shouldn't have encountered any problems. But for the sake of caution, he said in a loud voice, "Xiaoyu, hear me and answer me." "Big brother Qin, I'm here." Space fluctuated and Lei Xiaoyu's figure appeared. As she saw Qin Yu return, her face lit up with joy. Qin Yu's eyes flashed. "Xiaoyu, how long have these two guests been here?" Lei Xiaoyu said, "It's been 4 hours." This Mr. Cui said that this tree hole is a hiding place that he discovered a long time ago. He didn't know that it had a new master. Cui Yongji smiled. "Fellow Taoist Qin, is that right? I have no ill intentions. Otherwise, I wouldn't have waited until now. This tree hole is only one of my several safe houses. Since the two of you have already moved in, I will give it to you." He lifted a hand and pointed to the skies. "However, the time has come. Us master and disciple are unable to rush to our next resting place. I hope that fellow Taoist Qin will allow us to temporarily stay here for the night. Fellow Taoist Qin, rest assured. Once the blood moon disappears, us master and disciple will immediately leave. We won't have any other thoughts." His voice was sincere and his aura was gentle. Qin Yu relaxed. "So that's how it is. Since we have fallen to this world, we should support each other. Mr. Chui and this fellow Taoist can naturally stay here. Chui Yongji's smile was bright. Thank you, fellow Taoist Qin. Qin, you gestured with his hand. Please. Before his voice fell, he took advantage of the momentum and stepped forwards. The ground instantly caved in and countless cracks spread out. Chapter 924. Qin Yu's sudden attack had caused the situation to rapidly change. Even Lei Xiaoyu hadn't expected this. She subconsciously widened her eyes. After several months together, she had already understood Qin Yu's character. Although he wasn't a pure gentleman, he still had a bottom line in his heart. If Cui Yongji and his disciple could be trusted, then he wouldn't be stingy with sheltering them for a night and helping them avoid the horrors of the blood moon. Since they had attacked, there was definitely a problem with this master and disciple duo. Although she didn't know how Qin Yu discovered them, Lei Xiaoyu didn't doubt this at all. Thinking of this, her face turned pale and her heart thumped nonstop. Lei Xiaoyu was intelligent to begin with. After she reacted, her thoughts raced for a moment before she guessed the approximate truth. The reason that Cui Yongji and his disciple had been friendly and hadn't attacked her before was because they feared the spells Qin Yu had placed at the entrance. If Qin Yu hadn't returned by the time the blood moon arrived, then they would tear off their hypocritical faces. Just thinking about this caused Lei Xiaoyu to shudder. In fact, her guess was extremely close to the truth. After being caught off guard by Qin Yu's sudden punch, Cui Yongji's eyes turned dark and gloomy. He really couldn't figure out how this brat had discovered something was wrong with his perfect disguise. Whatever, the blood moon was about to arrive, and he didn't have time to waste thinking about this. He originally wanted to use less effort to deal with these two, but now he could only use some other methods. That's right, even though he had been discovered by Qin Yu and had been caught off guard, Cui Yongji still had absolute confidence in himself. A junior that hadn't even stepped into the divine realm. Even if he had some strength, how could he be his match? Attack! Open the entrance spell and capture that woman. Cui Yongji sneered. He lifted his hand and blazing flames gathered, forcing Qin Yu back. The disciple behind him diabolically grinned and shot into the skies. His fist punched out, and the temperature between the heavens and earth plummeted. Xiaoyu, hide back in the tree hole. Qin Yu shouted out loud and dodged the scarlet fire saber. His black robes had been cut open, and his flesh had been roasted red. At this time his eyebrows fiercely jumped up. A trace of fear and dread descended, covering his mind. This feeling, the blood moon was about to arrive. Across from him, Cui Yongji frowned. Then he darkly smiled. Junior, consider yourself lucky. I have no time to play with you. He took a step forward and disappeared in an instant. Let's end this. As the icy syllables tumbled in the air, his figure appeared in front of Qin Yu in the next moment. He lifted a hand and thrust out. With a loud roar, Qin Yu didn't seem to have time to dodge. His hands formed a circle around Qin Yu's forehead. Puff! Cui Yongji's fingertips sank into his flesh and blood. His expression was cold, and his eyes revealed a trace of disdain. Using your life to trade for my life. Junior, you are ruthless enough. But now that your life is gone, what will you use to fight with me? The fingertip that had sunk into Qin Yu's chest suddenly split open. Countless crimson needles shot out like blood vessels, wildly drilling deeper into his flesh and blood. In the next moment, these spikes sprayed venom at the same time. Even a single drop of venom was enough to kill millions of living beings. That was why Cui Yongji was so confident. His most powerful technique had never been his cultivation base, but rather his life poison that he had refined and accumulated over countless years. When his fingertips pierced through Qin Yu's chest and sank into his flesh and blood, in Cui Yongji's eyes he had already died. Is that so? Qin Yu's lips curled up in a smile. Dark red spots had already appeared on his face caused by the venom, but his eyes remained calm and cold. His hands that were slapping towards Chui Yongji's forehead suddenly turned into a hug, pulling Chui Yongji into his embrace. Qin Yu's arms were like iron, firmly imprisoning him. Chui Yongji's complexion changed. He could feel the formidable strength contained in Qin Yu's arms and instantly knew that there was a problem. He was well aware of just how powerful his own life poison was, let alone a junior that hadn't even entered the divine realm. Even a powerhouse on the same level would become fish on a chopping board once this poison invaded their body. But it was clear that his life poison hadn't displayed its intended effect this time. Moreover, what caused Chui Yongji's heart to palpitate the most was that he faintly felt as if he had fallen into some fatal trap. Like a bolt of lightning cutting through the fog, a thought suddenly drilled into Chui Yongji's mind. He deliberately allowed me to get close to him. But why? How did this junior know of my strongest technique? And how did he manage to resist the onslaught of my poison? Qin Yu didn't give Chui Yongji any more time to be angry or think. At this moment, his right index finger suddenly turned transparent. A terrifying swallowing strength erupted from it, and the target it swallowed was the life poison that Chui Yongji had placed into Qin Yu's body. Ah, his life poison was swallowed. To Chui Yongji, this was no different from a heart-wrenching pain. His eyes turned red and he screamed out, "Impossible! How could you do this?" At the same time, all of his strength crazily erupted. He wanted to break free from Qin Yu's imprisonment and take his finger back from his body. Kacha! Kacha! In that moment, the sounds of breaking flesh and bones rang out from within Qin Yu's body. Even in the divine realm, Chui Yongji was an absolute powerhouse. As he crazily struggled, even with the intensity of the ancient immortal body, he immediately suffered heavy losses. But the strongest ability of the ancient immortal body was its nearly undying and indestructible self-regeneration. The two hearts in Qin Yu's chest wildly beat, causing his blood energy to boil and speed up the recovery of his mortal body. At this moment, all of Qin Yu's exposed flesh and blood turned red, as if there were raging flames burning around him. But this sort of eruption method consumed a terrifying amount of blood energy. Even with Qin Yu's mortal body, he couldn't maintain it for too long. He had to find a source to replenish it. Qin Yu landed on Chui Yongji's back. His 10 fingers tightened like claws, instantly tearing apart his flesh and blood as he displayed the ancient race's tyrannical, plundering technique. Bang! Billowing blood energy was wildly plundered. It was like a raging river roaring into Qin Yu's body. It was suppressed and refined by the ancient immortal body, like oil being poured onto a raging inferno. This caused the recovery speed of his damaged flesh and blood to rapidly rise once more. Nearly all his broken flesh and blood would instantly regenerate. Chui Yongji felt like he was going to go crazy. This boy in front of him wasn't even at the divine realm, but he was actually able to force him into such a distressed situation. Not only could he forcefully swallow his life poison, but he also had the ability to plunder away his blood energy to accelerate his own recovery. Between the two of them, just which one was the great Dao plunderer? Chui Yongji could clearly feel that every time he erupted with a struggle, he would cause fatal damage to Qin Yu. His head was already soaked in blood, but he was like a piece of sticky candy that couldn't be torn apart, stubbornly wrapping around his body. Time slowly passed. Fear began to grow in Chui Yongji's heart. He could gradually feel the shadow of death approaching. It was as thick as ink, as deep as the abyss. "Barton, come back! Kill this boy, kill him!" Chui Yongji roared out loud. Barton, who had been attacking the spell in the tree hole, turned around and rushed over. He leapt behind Qin Yu, formed an ice sword in his hand, and cut down at Qin Yu's head. Pa! The ice sword shattered. A hideous wound appeared on Qin Yu's face. Large swathes of flesh and blood tumbled outwards. One could even see the pale white bones underneath, as well as the gash that had been cut open by the sword. But in the next moment, the gash in his bones and flesh began to wildly regenerate at an astonishing speed, restoring him to his original state. Qin Yu turned his head and glanced at Barton. Just this glance caused Barton, whose palm had been split open, to stiffen in place. He felt as if he had been locked onto by a cruel predator at the very top of the food chain. Any reckless move he made would be torn to shreds. Cui Yongji angrily roared out, "You bastard, what are you doing? This person has a super strong bodily regenerative ability. Use your power of eternal extreme cold and seal away his boiling blood energy. Hurry and attack." "Ah, yes, teacher." Barton awoke from his daze. He lifted a hand and tore between his eyebrows, as if he had opened some seal placed on his body. His aura suddenly rose up. Pitch-black lines appeared on the surface of his flesh and blood. They wove together, forming incomparably complex patterns that covered his entire body. In the air, the temperature crazily fell. Countless black snowflakes sprinkled down from above. Barton lifted a hand, and the black snow gathered, condensing into a black ice spear in his hand. Without any hesitation, Barton grasped the black ice spear with both hands. He leapt high into the air and ruthlessly thrust it towards Qin Yu's back. Puff! His taut flesh and blood tore apart, and the black ice spear pierced through his chest. Barton's eyes lit up with joy. He didn't pull out the spear at all, instead ruthlessly thrusting it down once more. Puff! Qin Yu's chest was pierced through once more. He spat out a mouthful of blood, the blood mixed with bits of ice. The power of eternal extreme cold contained within the black ice spear had already invaded Qin Yu's body, crazily destroying it. And what was most terrifying was that this ice-cold strength could actually freeze his blood energy. Qin Yu's bodily regenerative speed was clearly reduced. Cui Yongji laughed. Good, this is it. He stubbornly glared at Qin Yu, his eyes blazing with hatred. Junior, although I could feel that your aura was extraordinary, I never imagined that you would have such terrifying methods. But today you are doomed to die. I will eke you up, bit by bit, and then obtain everything you have. The entrance to the tree hole was sealed, and the withstanding attacks had already stopped. Lei Xiaoyu hesitated again and again. Then she cautiously looked out. What she saw caused her heart to nearly stop beating. Qin Yu was pincered by Cui Yongji's apostle and couldn't turn around. He could only allow the people behind him to pierce through his body with ice spears. Puff, puff! In the moment that she was stunned, 2 more holes appeared in Qin Yu's chest. Their surfaces were covered with ice crystals, and the rate at which their flesh and blood grew was extremely slow. Looking through the holes, one could clearly see that his heart was riddled with scars. His heart had been pierced through many times, and although it was doing its best to repair itself, its speed was becoming increasingly slow. If this continued, it would eventually come to an end. Ah! Lei Xiaoyu screamed out loud. Without hesitation, she rushed out from the tree hole. Her long hair fluttered in the wind, instantly turning purple. Rumble, rumble. In the skies above, black clouds seemed to weave together. Endless arcs of lightning leapt about, gathering into 1,000,000,000,000 bolts of thunder that came crashing down. Their target was actually Lei Xiaoyu, who was floating in midair. Barton, who had grasped the black ice spear and was crazily thrusting towards Qin Yu, was startled by the thunder above him. He looked up. Then he saw Lei Xiaoyu floating in midair, wrapped in 1,000,000,000,000 bolts of thunder. She was like a descending goddess of thunder. Everyone knew that Rock City's Lei Qianjun had risen to power through slaughter. With a single shout, he had beheaded 1,000,000,000,000 people and led the Lei family to become an overlord. But what they didn't know was that the reason the Lei family was surnamed Lei was because one of their ancestors had an almighty being who had reached the Tao of Thunder. He had fused thunder runes into his bloodline and was known as the controller of thunder. Afterwards, because of a great accident, the Lei family's bloodline was nearly severed. Only a single branch of Rock City remained, and for dozens of generations, not a single one of them had awakened their bloodline. Chapter 9:25. Bathed in the baptism of 10,000 lightning, Lei Xiaoyu's eyes turned silver white. Her expression was icy cold and without the least bit of emotion. She lifted a hand and pressed forwards. Barton screamed out loud. His body exploded into countless blood shadows that howled in all directions. This was his strongest, life-saving ability. Once he used it, his cultivation would be greatly damaged, and he would forever lose a part of his soul. This would affect his future cultivation. But at this time he didn't hesitate at all. This was because the moment Lei Xiaoyu lifted her hand, Barton could feel the aura of despair. If he didn't run away, he would immediately die. Rumble, rumble. Endless lightning flooded the world, weaving together into a boundless net that covered the world without leaving a single gap. No matter how many of the blood shadows Barton turned into when he blew himself up, there was no way for him to escape this omnidirectional attack. Beneath the thunder, the blood shadows were like water vapor, evaporating in the blink of an eye. The silver white in Lei Xiaoyu's eyes rapidly faded and her long hair returned to black. She fell to the ground, vomiting great mouthfuls of blood. Just that strike, just now, had exhausted all of her strength. The Lei family had existed for dozens of generations, and there had never been a bloodline awakener. The most important reason was that the thunder-controlling bloodline was tyrannical and had extremely high requirements for a cultivator. For Lei Xiaoyu to be able to erupt with the strength of a single strike in her current state was because of her powerful bloodline. But she also had to pay a price. She fell to the ground. Her body curled up and her aura rapidly weakened. In the blink of an eye, she was like a candle in the wind, about to be extinguished in the next moment. Qin Yu roared out, "Xiaoyu!" He took a deep breath and roared out loud. Icicles drilled out from his body. This was the power of eternal cold that invaded his body being forcefully forced out. Cui Yongji's eyes twitched. He felt an irrepressible fear towards this Qin Yu. Madman! This was a madman that couldn't be beaten to death. Barton had already died, and it was impossible for him to win. He had to immediately run away. If he continued like this, he would really die here. As for the blood moon that was about to arrive, Cui Yongji didn't care about that anymore. With his methods, if he ran away, he would at least have a chance of surviving. "Junior, we will definitely meet again in the future. I swear that I will make you pay the price." Cui Yongji roared with hatred. His body was like wax under high temperatures, rapidly melting into a puddle of black goo. He broke free from Qin Yu's imprisonment and wriggled about to escape. "You can't escape." Qin Yu looked down at the wound on his chest and the black mucus that was tightly sucked in. He lifted his right index finger and coldly said, "If you cannot keep this person here, then there is no need for you to continue existing." A black vortex appeared on the transparent index finger. As it spun rapidly, a blurry face could be seen. It was like another Qin Yu's face. It was extremely similar to him, but it was deathly pale without the least bit of life. It was as if the meaning of this face's existence was only destruction and slaughter, and it caused all things in the world to feel terror and despair. The black goo that Cui Yongji had turned into pulled out a long tail. The tail was stuck in Qin Yu's chest. Now, this tail seemed to be grabbed by someone and wildly pulled backwards. "No, just what kind of monster are you? I have transformed into an invisible body that is unfettered by all shackles. Yet I still can't break free." Cui Yongji's face appeared in the mucus. He looked at Qin Yu, his face filled with panic. As a plunderer of the great Tao, he had always been the nightmare of other cultivators. This was the first time he had felt the taste of despair from someone else. The swallowing strength coming from Qin Yu's body became increasingly strong. Cui Yongji could almost hear the sound of sharp teeth grinding against each other. If he didn't escape now, there really wouldn't be enough time. Ah! With a miserable cry, Chui Yongji's invisible body seemed to be cut apart by a sharp blade split in half. The half that obtained its freedom shrank into a ball and held into the distance. The other half lost the ability to resist and was instantly swallowed up. Qin Yu glanced at the direction that Chui Yongji fled in. Without hesitation, he turned and rushed towards Lei Xiaoyu. At this time, the world suddenly fell into pitch black. The blood moon was coming. In this darkness, it was like he was bathing in the extreme cold of the world. Qin Yu felt as if the blood in his body would freeze over. He roared out with all his strength. The two scarred hearts in his chest wildly beat as he forcefully maintained his movements. Lei Xiaoyu's weak voice was incomparably clear in the darkness. "Big brother Qin, leave, hurry, and leave, the blood moon is coming, Shua." In the blink of an eye, as far as the eye could see, everything was bathed in the color of blood. This was the first time that beneath the illumination of the blood moon, the chill that Qin Yu felt increased by 10 times or even 100 times over. "Kacha! Kacha!" He could hear the blood in his body freezing. He was here, he was almost there. Lei Xiaoyu was right in front of him. "Pa!" Qin Yu crashed into the ground. As the ground caved in, he reached out and grabbed the stiff Lei Xiaoyu. He turned his head to look up. This simple movement actually required a tremendous amount of strength. His neck emitted creaking sounds. "Get out of here." With a roar, the sun and moon force field within his soul space instantly spread out, isolating the icy cold that invaded Qin Yu's body. With a heavy step, Qin Yu held onto Lei Xiaoyu and shot into the skies, hurtling towards the entrance of the tree hole. But at this time, the withered tree that was bathed in the blood moon had already begun to revive. Those bare branches that pointed towards the skies were quickly dyed with the color of blood, turning into nimble tentacles. With an excited scream, countless tentacles howled out, weaving together into a net that would seal off Qin Yu's path into the tree hole. In midair, life and death could be decided in an instant. Qin Yu's consciousness entered an incomparably calm state. He was well aware that he couldn't rush into the tree hole before the tentacles blocked him. There wasn't enough time. He had to slow down by a single breath of time. This single breath of time represented life or death. Taking a deep breath, Qin Yu lifted a hand, his eyes filled with determination. Since there wasn't enough time, then he would ask for one more breath of time from the heavens and earth. His finger fell. At this time, the rules of the Tao of Time were triggered. Qin Yu spat out a mouthful of blood. The blood tentacles that shot towards him suddenly came to a standstill. Whoosh! By a hair's breadth, he brushed past the blood tentacles. Qin Yu rushed into the tree hole and tumbled to the ground. Outside the tree hole, the frozen time was restored. The withered tree flew into a rage, its tentacles wildly lashing out at the earth. But at the entrance of the tree hole, the silver light emitted by the slash marks made it so that the tentacles didn't dare to go any further than 50 feet away. Who? Qin Yu gasped for breath. He felt as if his entire body was being cut open by a saber. Every inch of his flesh and blood twitched in pain. His field of vision darkened. He bit down on the tip of his tongue and stood up. He looked down at Lei Xiaoyu's condition. "Qin, big brother." After entering the tree hole and avoiding the illumination of the blood moon, the chill faded away. Lei Xiaoyu squeezed out a smile on her pale face. "I finally am no longer a burden." Qin Yu lifted a hand and placed it on her body. "You saved my life, so of course you aren't a burden." He took a deep breath and forcefully maintained his consciousness. He continued to say, "Xiaoyu, if you feel tired, then close your eyes and sleep. When you wake up, you won't feel so uncomfortable." Lei Xiaoyu blinked. "I'm afraid I won't wake up," Qin Yu smiled. "I guarantee you that you will definitely wake up. Believe me." She looked at him for a moment and then closed her eyes. She fell into a deep sleep, the tears that she had been holding back finally falling down from the corners of her eyes. Qin Yu half knelt on the ground. His will was taut to the limit, but he didn't dare to faint. Otherwise, Lei Xiaoyu would really die, because of the awakening of her thunder bloodline. Her current condition was terrible to the extreme. After taking several deep breaths, Qin Yu bit down on his fingertip and placed it in Lei Xiaoyu's mouth. After drinking the blood of the ancient race, one would become an ancient race blood warrior. This was a far more primitive and superior method than signing a blood slave contract. The existence of a blood warrior could help the ancient race bear the brunt of the damage. In some cases, they could even become a substitute for the ancient race. For instance, if the goo insects in Lei Xiaoyu's body involved Qin Yu, he could have a blood warrior bear the backlash in his place at any time. Of course, if the blood warrior really died as the master, the ancient race would have to pay a considerable price. But for Qin Yu, turning Lei Xiaoyu into a blood warrior meant that he had to bear a part of the swallowing of the goo insects in her place. By herself, she wouldn't be able to survive the next hurdle. The blood warriors and the ancient race communicated with each other to begin with. It was just that there weren't many ancient race members who were willing to add injuries to their own in order to save a blood warrior. Qin Yu forcefully endured the loss of blood and the intensifying feeling of weakness and collapse. Then, with a light hum in his mind, the runes of a blood warrior began to appear on the surface of Lei Xiaoyu's body. Qin Yu immediately felt the swallowing of the goo insects in Lei Xiaoyu's body. It was like an iron rod was ruthlessly piercing into his head. Qin Yu spat out a mouthful of blood. Before his consciousness fell into darkness, his last thought was, how had Lei Xiaoyu managed to withstand the terrifying pain of being swallowed by the goo insects all these years? When Qin Yu awoke once more, the blood moon hung high in the sky outside. The withered tree stood atop a mountain peak, wildly fighting with two bone beasts. 1 against 2, the withered tree was clearly at a disadvantage. By relying on its massive body and powerful regenerative abilities, the withered tree was able to barely maintain a stalemate. The ancient race's immortal body displayed its powerful regenerative abilities. Although Qin Yu still felt a bit weak, his movements were no longer hindered. He hurriedly checked Lei Xiaoyu's condition. Although her aura was weak, it had already stabilized and her life wasn't in danger for the time being. Qin Yu relaxed a little. He looked up at the two bone beasts fighting the withered tree. One of them was the one he had investigated before, but the other one was unfamiliar. Looking carefully, it also seemed a bit familiar. Shaking his dizzy head, Qin Yu finally realized that this bone beast was actually the same as the one he had seen when he first found the cut mark. It was just that this bone beast was clearly larger than the one he had seen before. Looking at the situation of the battlefield, the bone beast he had investigated before was clearly holding back. As for the other bone beast, it was much crazier and crazier. It didn't seem to care about its own consumption as it continued to cause terrifying damage to the withered tree's tentacles. From the looks of it, it was clear that there was a deep grudge between them. Qin Yu rubbed his nose. As he thought back to when he destroyed the withered tree, he suddenly felt his heart race. Could this bone beast be coming for him? This was truly an undeserved calamity. Who would have thought that a pile of rotten bones would actually have friends? Perhaps it wasn't as simple as friends. One big and one small corresponded to a male and a female. Perhaps they were a pair when they were alive. If it was true, then it would make sense that the bone beast was seeking revenge. Qin Yu rubbed between his eyebrows and bitterly smiled. He hurriedly restrained the chaotic thoughts in his mind. Although the withered tree hadn't shown any signs of defeat, that was because the bone beast hadn't used its full strength. If it could seize this chance, it could instantly change the tides of the battle. But one couldn't forget that besides the 3 sides currently fighting, there were at least 10 other terrifying life forms glaring at them like tigers watching their prey. If the withered tree was severely wounded, they would surely kick him while he was down. Qin Yu didn't care about the withered tree's life or death. But if it was killed now, he and Lei Xiaoyu would suffer a calamity. Chapter 9:26. Let alone Qin Yu's current condition. Even if he was at his peak, he still might not be able to resist a single bone beast. Looking at the increasingly full-blood moon above his head, Qin Yu took a deep breath. A dark golden light shined in his eyes, as he thought he saw something different. The moonlight above his head seemed to have some sort of catalytic effect, causing the withered tree and the two-bone beasts to fall into a berserk state. This could be explained. Otherwise, the withered tree clearly had its own will, and it would have sensed the danger it was in. Looking away, Qin Yu frowned. After several breaths of time, a sharp light flashed in his eyes. The longer he delayed, the greater the influence the blood moon would have on the withered tree. Without any other choice, he could only gamble and hope that this resurrected withered tree wasn't brainless. His thoughts stirred, and the dark golden light reappeared in his eyes once more. The sun and moon force field fluctuated, covering Qin Yu. He lifted a foot and stomped down. Because he was inside the withered tree, the vibrating sound waves were directly transmitted into its consciousness. Taking advantage of the moment when the withered tree paused, Qin Yu roared out, "If I don't leave now, when will I?" This voice contained the aura of the jade embryo egg, as well as the fluctuations of the sun and moon force field. The withered tree's roots dug deep into the mountain's summit, wildly lashing out at the two-bone beasts. Suddenly it trembled. At this moment, the interference the blood moon exerted on it was interrupted for a moment. Without hesitation, the withered tree pulled out its roots and wove them together. Then it turned and raced down the mountain. Roar! Bone Beast 2 roared out loud and chased after it without hesitation. Bone Beast 1 was still preserving its strength. After a moment of hesitation, it shook its giant head, reared back its head, and stayed on the mountain's summit. It seemed as if it didn't want to force the withered tree into a desperate situation. Or perhaps the blood vitality in the mountain valley was more enticing to it. The withered tree's several legs wildly raced away. Bone Beast 2 chased after it. After leaving the mountain valley, the two sides engaged in a fierce battle. In the end, Bone Beast 2's body was twisted in half, and half of the withered tree's tentacles were cut off. Both sides were wounded. The shrub drilled out from the ground, and the blood moon vanished. Before that, the withered tree dragged its heavy steps back to where it grew and took root. Qin Yu could feel its weak aura. It was clear that it had suffered heavy injuries after such a great battle. Without bothering to continue observing the withered tree, Qin Yu glanced at the unconscious Lei Xiaoyu and closed his eyes to cultivate. He needed to recover from his injuries as soon as possible. 3 days later, there was only a small piece of the blood moon left from reaching full circle. Qin Yu estimated that it would take at most 5 days for the blood moon to reach full circle. This was a bit different from Qin Yu's predictions. Although the blood moon followed the law of waning and waxing, it clearly wasn't a 30-day cycle. It should have been a bit longer. Shua, he opened his eyes. In the pitch-black world, a sharp light flashed in his eyes. A few breaths later, the light from the shrub illuminated the world. After quietly looking at the world outside the tree hole, he stood up and walked over to Lei Xiaoyu's side. After sleeping for several days, and with Qin Yu sharing the burden of the goo insects, her condition had stabilized. He lifted his hand and placed it between her eyebrows. After several breaths of time, Lei Xiaoyu's eyelashes fluttered and she slowly opened her eyes. "Big brother Qin." His voice was still weak. Qin Yu smiled. "I said that you would definitely wake up. I didn't lie to you." Lei Xiaoyu nodded. She tried her best to smile, but tears rolled down her cheeks as she smiled. Qin Yu's expression stiffened. He looked into the depths of her eyes and saw some tumbling emotions. He slowly said, "You know?" Lei Xiaoyu turned her head away and wiped away her tears. "When the control of thunder bloodline awakened, I sensed the existence of a goo insect. So it was because of it that I felt so much pain all these years." She bit her lips and looked at Qin Yu. Big brother Qin, please tell me the truth. How much time do I have left? Xiao Yu, big brother Qin, please tell me. I promise I won't cry or make a fuss. Qin Yu let out a long breath. Half a year. Xiao Yu mumbled, so it was like this. It seems my senses weren't wrong. Thank you. Big brother Qin, you didn't lie to me. This girl had actually sensed her lifespan. It must be because of her bloodline awakening. Qin Yu grasped her hand. Xiao Yu, there isn't much time left. I cannot patiently sit down and comfort you, but I guarantee you that you still have a chance to continue living. Exerting some force, he pulled Xiao Yu up and turned her around to lie on his back. When he reached the cave entrance, Qin Yu jumped down. Strong winds held in his ears, and he narrowed his eyes. Pa! He landed on the ground. Without hesitation, Qin Yu carried Xiao Yu on his back and raced towards the end of the dark world. Xiao Yu, do you know? If I cannot unravel the secrets within the slash marks, then perhaps we will only have 5 days left to live. He briefly explained the changes in the blood moon and the relationship between the slash marks. Big brother Qin, is this true? I won't lie to you. In truth, although I have grasped some key points, I have no confidence in whether or not I can succeed. So, in a sense, we are all standing on the edge of death. But I have not given up, nor will I give up. Even if there is only a sliver of hope, I will do my best to find a way to continue living. Big brother Qin, I didn't tell you before because I didn't want you to worry. But now, I'm telling you because I hope you can understand that there is no such thing as a smooth road in this world. A calamity can appear at any time and cause you to die. What we can do is to break through the thorns and do our best to keep ourselves alive. Even if we fail in the end, we won't regret our lives and we won't have any regrets. Remember, whether or not we die is the end, but whether or not we want to die is our own business. No one can control that. The conversation ended here. What Qin Yu didn't tell Xiao Yu was that he had been doing this all these years. Otherwise, how could he have survived so many trials and tribulations until now? Nothing in the world could be controlled by a single person. But within the scope of control, one had to grasp the throat of fate. His luck wasn't too good. After 10 hours, Qin Yu finally found a new slash mark. He swept out with his divine sense and didn't discover anything wrong. He sat down with Xiao Yu on his back and slowly pointed a finger. He closed his eyes and calmed his mind, his sense magnified to an infinite degree. With his fingertip as a medium, he wrapped the slash mark into his mind. 6 hours later, with a light cracking sound, the slash mark shattered and vanished without a trace. Qin Yu slowly opened his eyes. There seemed to be several blurry phantoms that flashed in his eyes. Looking down at his fingertip, he saw that there was another crack there. It was constantly repeating the process of the wound healing and then splitting open. Qin Yu clenched his fists. Feeling the pain in his fingertips, he turned and walked away. As his feet landed on the ground caved in, and he instantly increased his speed to the limit. He had used 10 hours to find the slash mark and another 6 hours to perceive it. There was only 8 hours left until the blood moon descended. Considering the unexpected situation, he needed to leave an hour of safety. Qin Yu had to return to the withered tree within 6 hours. Xiao Yu lowered her head and stuck close to Qin Yu. She felt the warmth of his body and looked at his calm face. The fear, despair, and sorrow in her heart gradually calmed down. Through today's conversation, as well as the things that Qin Yu had done in the past several hours, Xiao Yu felt that she had gained a deeper understanding of him. Big brother Qin wasn't just saying it, he was really putting it into practice. Life and death were the end. Whether or not one wanted to die was their own business. No one could control that. She took a deep breath and pressed herself closer to Qin Yu. Xiao Yu silently decided that she would struggle against the heavens. In these past years, she had suffered enough suffering. Even if she committed great crimes in her past life, they should have all been paid off by now. She wanted to live on, This was because Lei Xiaoyu had a premonition that this man who was silently carrying her would become an existence that countless people would look up to and worship in the future. Only by living could she see his future and participate in those wonderful events. Big brother Qin, thank you. Hearing the calm in her voice, as well as the unshakable firmness of her will, Qin Yu smiled. I don't need you to thank me. I just want you to be happy in the future. Lei Xiaoyu nodded. Whoosh, whoosh, Qin Yu's speed became faster and faster, leaving behind a series of afterimages in the air. Occasionally, he would look up at the pitch-black skies, emotions fluctuating in the depths of his eyes. There seemed to be something wrong. Taking a deep breath, the two hearts in his chest began to rapidly beat faster. His exposed flesh and blood turned crimson red, and the sound of vibrations emitted from his bones. Every step he took caused the ground to rumble and collapse. His speed rose yet again. Another 2 hours passed. They were still far from the dead tree. The restlessness in Qin Yu's heart became increasingly thick. At this time, he suddenly heard some movement. He looked up into the distance and saw a sword light shooting into the skies. The tyrannical sword intent carried with it a biting, cold-killing intent. Several miserable howls came to an abrupt end. The faint smell of blood was blown into his nose and mouth by the wind. Qin Yu frowned, a bit of hesitation in his eyes. In the next moment, his feet slammed into the ground, forcefully stopping as the ground cracked open. Lei Xiaoyu shouted out, Big brother Qin, what is it? Qin Yu took a deep breath. I want to save someone. Shua, he changed direction. After several breaths of time, he tore through the black thorns, blocking his way, and landed on the messy battlefield. On the ground, sword scars crisscrossed, each one emitting a chilling, killing intent. If an ordinary life were to step into these scars, they would instantly be torn to pieces. Sweeping his eyes around, Qin Yu found Ban Bu lying in the middle of a group of corpses, bleeding profusely. That's right. This was the powerful sword cultivator that he had saved in Rivawada City in order to attract the attention of all sides. When Qin Yu saw the sword light just now, he had sensed his aura. At this time, Ban Bu's eyes flashed open. With a humming sound, a terrifying sword intent locked onto him. Qin Yu glanced at him. He lifted a hand and pointed forward. The terrifying sword intent was like a bubble that instantly burst and dissipated. Ban Bu's eyes widened and he was stunned. You are, Qin Yu lightly said. If you don't want to die, then follow me. He lifted a hand and grabbed Ban Bu. Then he turned and continued running towards the ancient tree. Finally, the ancient tree appeared in the distance. In normal circumstances, the blood moon would only arrive in another 2 hours. But the restlessness in Qin Yu's heart told him that some change had occurred. He didn't slow down at all. Instead, he moved even faster than before. Holding his breath, Qin Yu erupted with an unprecedented limit. Ban Bu stuffily coughed as he was pulled. He subconsciously widened his eyes, a puzzled look on his face. He didn't know why Qin Yu had suddenly accelerated, but it was clear that this sort of forceful eruption would place a tremendous burden on his body. In such a terrifying place, he had to ensure that he had enough strength at all times. Otherwise, danger could descend upon him at any moment. In Ban Bu's eyes, Qin Yu's actions were meaningless. It could even be called stupid. But he didn't dare to come to a conclusion. This was because Qin Yu's terrifying finger had shattered the last of his sword intent and struck his mind, causing him to recall certain scenes from Rivawada City. Thus, Ban Bu had given up resisting and willingly allowed himself to be taken away by Qin Yu. Without waiting for him to think any further, Qin Yu's feet slammed into the ground. He pulled Ban Bu and Lei Xiaoyu and shot into the skies. As the spatial imprisonment vanished, Ban Bu suddenly realized that Qin Yu's goal was this tree hole. But now that they were so close, his previous actions became even more unreasonable. Pa! Qin Yu landed on the ground and put Ban Bu down. He turned and looked at the world outside the tree hole. 1 breath of time, 2 breaths of time, 3 breaths of time. In silence, time quietly passed. Banbu's lips moved, but before he could speak, a blood-red color covered the earth. Chapter 9:27. On the ground, countless dark green shrubs were exposed to the blood moon. As if they had been splashed with boiling oil or acid, they emitted shrill screams as they rapidly turned black and rotted away, emitting billowing black smoke. They quickly shrank their bodies back into the ground with a whoosh. However, the black smoke soared into the sky and gathered in the sky. In the end, it formed a huge rolling sphere that continued to rise upwards at an unstoppable speed. This was because the goal of this black sphere was the blood moon hanging high in the pitch-black skies. It grew faster and faster, flying higher and higher until all that was left was a black. At this moment, in the entire mysterious world, all living beings, without exception, could clearly hear no sound of collision. But a heaven-shaking roar rang out in their minds, setting off endless vibrations that left their ears ringing and their vision dizzy. Thus, on that nearly round blood moon, a small black spot appeared. If one didn't look carefully, they wouldn't be able to see it. But it did exist. It was like a giant crater formed after a meteor struck it. Qin Yu had a solemn expression. His eyebrows furrowed together as he looked up at the descending blood moon. Faint traces of dark golden light surged in the depths of his eyes. In this state, he could faintly see the surface of the blood moon being rapidly annihilated and swallowed up by the black smoke. But during this process, the light released by the blood moon clearly dimmed a great deal. It was clear that there was some sort of balance between it and the shrubs on the ground. By breaking this balance and arriving in this world ahead of time, the shrubs would suffer tremendous damage, and the blood moon would also pay the price. Banbu's eyes widened. He looked outside the tree hole and saw the earth covered in blood red. Then he looked at Qin Yu's back. The hesitation and puzzlement in his heart melted away like snow beneath the blazing sun. It was that person. It had to be that senior. Otherwise, who could sense the arrival of the blood moon ahead of time and avoid its attack? With this judgment in mind, the more he looked at Qin Yu's back, the more he felt it was similar. Although this senior had worn black robes, he could still roughly distinguish their figures. With a deep breath, Banbu struggled to his feet and kneeled. Banbu thanks Senior for saving my life. When we parted that day, Qin Yu lifted a hand, interrupting his words. He lightly said, "Cultivate first. Once your injuries stabilize, I have some instructions for you." Banbu respectfully nodded. He retreated to a corner of the tree hole and sat down cross-legged. Lei Xiaoyu looked at him, then at Qin Yu. "Big brother Qin, do you know him?" Qin Yu nodded. "I helped him out a little in the past. I didn't think he would remember me." This was obviously a lie, but the clever Lei Xiaoyu blinked her eyes and said, "Oh." She didn't pursue the matter further. Qin Yu smiled. "Don't think about it too much. It's true that I have a use for this person. You rest first. I will continue meditating." He put down Lei Xiaoyu and walked to the entrance of the tree hole. He sat down cross-legged and looked at John Hen, finding it hard to calm his heart. Looking up at the blood moon, Qin Yu subconsciously narrowed his eyes. Indeed, his senses had been correct. The blood moon had descended 2 hours in advance. It was foreseeable that many people would be caught unprepared and encounter danger. Some might even lose their lives. If he hadn't sensed it ahead of time, he would have become one of the people who might have died. Qin Yu's eyes were deep and profound, like a nebula, able to contain all things. He was silent, but there was a thought in his heart. As time passed, it became increasingly clear. The blood moon that suddenly descended had broken the balance of the world and willingly withstood the backlash of the shrubs. Could its goal be him? It wasn't that Qin Yu thought too highly of himself or that he was delusional. Rather, it was that he was well aware of the secrets on his body, and they were tempting enough. Disregarding the little blue lamp, just the jade embryo egg and the sun and moon force field, Any one of them could stir up a storm of blood. And he had used these two strengths in this mysterious world when the blood moon had descended. Of course, the most important thing was that Qin Yu felt an intense restlessness in his mind. He had already sensed this several hours ago. If this had nothing to do with him, then how could he explain this intense feeling? Although he didn't know what this blood moon that descended every 24 hours was, his intuition told him that he had to leave this world as soon as possible. Was this the covetousness of the blood moon? Qin Yu bitterly smiled. He shook his head and suppressed these thoughts. He closed his eyes and opened them again a moment later. His eyes were calm as he looked at the Zhanhen at the entrance of the tree hole. There were still 4 days left. No matter how anxious he was to leave, he had to survive the night of the full moon first. Perhaps it was because the wounds he had received in his battle with the bone beast were too heavy. But after the withered tree revived today, it didn't leave the place it had taken root in. The tentacles tried to break into the tree hole once more. They stopped 20 feet away, hesitating for a long time before finally retreating. However, even if it didn't rush to the mountain valley to split the blood energy, the withered tree still had harvests. It stretched out its blood-red tentacles, bathing itself in more of the blood moon's light. Beneath the illumination of the blood moon, its recovery speed was noticeably faster. Qin Yu could feel that the withered tree strength was rapidly increasing. But all of this was only passively reflected in Qin Yu's perception. It was like a shadow flashing by. All of his attention was focused on the small Zhanhen mark in front of him. He woke up midway. Besides his tyrannical sword arts, he also cultivated other arcane skills. His recovery speed was far faster than an ordinary cultivator's. As he looked at the cave entrance and saw Qin Yu sitting cross-legged, a look of admiration and reverence gradually appeared in his eyes. It seemed that the reason Senior appeared here was to unravel the secrets within the Zhanhen mark. Not long after he left Rivawada City, he had been searching for soul treasures. Because of an accident, he had appeared in this world. Several months ago, Banbu had attempted to unravel the secrets of the Zhanhen mark. As a sword cultivator, he could faintly feel the sword intent contained within the Zhanhen mark. But unfortunately, Banbu had failed. It was only afterwards that Banbu learned that nearly all the cultivators who first entered this world had attempted something similar. But not a single one of them had succeeded. Instead, the Zhanhen mark in this world had suffered massive damage because of their attempts. Nowadays, besides newly arrived cultivators, no one dared to touch the Zhanhen mark in this world. Otherwise, as the number of Zhanhen marks decreased, more and more lives would die in the terrifying descent of the blood moon. If it were another cultivator standing in front of him today, Banbu would have stopped him without hesitation. In his opinion, this was only destroying the Zhanhen mark. There was no meaning in doing so. But the one doing so was Qin Yu. Deep in Banbu's eyes, he couldn't suppress his excitement and joy. If Senior succeeded, then this world would no longer be dangerous. He might even be able to smoothly escape. Of course, there were also some doubts in Banbu's heart. From what he could sense, with Senior's strength, even if this world was dangerous, it shouldn't pose a threat to him. But now, it seemed that Senior was acting cautiously. Could there be some other reason? 24 hours passed in the blink of an eye. After the blood moon vanished and the eternal night that covered the world arrived, it was illuminated once more by the impatient bushes. After being attacked by the blood moon, the bushes were dispirited and listless, but the light they released was even brighter than before. It was like a silent warning to the blood moon not to attempt to change the rules. Qin Yu stood up. Behind him, Banbu and Lei Xiaoyu opened their eyes at the same time. "Xiaoyu, come here." Lei Xiaoyu walked over and climbed onto Qin Yu's back. He turned and looked at Banbu. "How are you?" Banbu respectfully bowed. "My movements are no longer hindered. If Senior has any instructions, please feel free to speak." Qin Yu said, "I need to find more Zhanhen marks. You should understand what I mean." Banbu's heart shook. He thought that senior must have already made some harvests. Indeed, a senior was a senior. Even if his aura was strange, the abilities he possessed weren't something he could guess at. Without hesitation, he continued to say, "Senior, I know the location of a Jean Hen mark." Qin Yu's eyes brightened. With yesterday's speed, how long would it take to get there? Ban Bu thought for a moment. It would take 8 hours. Lead the way. Ban Bu leaped into the air. While he was in midair, his sword suddenly rang out and whistled towards the horizon. Qin Yu glanced at his back. With a flick of his sleeves, he laid down a spatial imprisonment, covering the cave entrance. Then he shot into the skies. "Ban Bu, this is only an avatar of mine. The strength it can control is limited. Slow down a bit." Qin Yu's voice echoed in his ears. Ban Bu's heart stirred. He respectfully bowed, and the sword shadow slowed down, continuing to lead the way. 2 hours later, Qin Yu suddenly said, "Change direction. Move 15 degrees to the left." Ban Bu nodded. A moment later, Qin Yu said, "Stop and restrain your aura." Shwa, shwa, the two landed on the ground. Qin Yu's thoughts stirred, and the sun-moon force field spread out, wrapping him and Lei Xiaoyu within. Behind them, Ban Bu's complexion changed. He quickly condensed his sword intent into a single point, not allowing it to leak out in the slightest. Several breaths of time later, a flock of black bats blotted out the skies. Each bat was several feet large, and their eyes were blood red, their fangs bared. Faint traces of black energy emitted from their bodies, weaving together into a massive black fog that followed them. A foul stench filled the air. Soon the bats flew over. There were heaven-shaking roars of monster beasts. The two sides had already begun fighting. Even though they were separated by a great distance, one could still feel the powerful fluctuations of auras released by these monster beasts. Ban Bu's forehead dripped with beads of sweat. If it weren't for the fact that he had turned around and stopped just in time, he feared they would have entered the monster beast territory and then been attacked by the bat swarm. Even with his cultivation, just thinking about the consequences left him cold. Hiss! Ban Bu sucked in a breath of cold air. All the hairs on his back stood up. At some unknown time, his exposed flesh had been covered in a layer of black. Poison! It was the bat swarm from just now. As he thought about the foul stench, Ban Bu's complexion turned ugly. He had already carefully sealed himself away, but he never thought he would still be poisoned. For there to be a reaction so quickly, it was clear just how terrifying the poison was. Ban Bu didn't dare to hesitate. He hurriedly said, "Senior, I've been poisoned. I must force it out immediately." Qin Yu glanced at him, his eyes light. "Don't move." Holding onto his hand, the black color that appeared on Ban Bu's flesh began to fade at a speed visible to the naked eye. After several breaths of time, it completely vanished. Qin Yu drew back his hand. "Let's hurry." Chapter 928. Lei Xiaoyu leaned close to Qin Yu's ear and whispered, "Big brother Qin, do you not trust this person?" Qin Yu didn't turn around. "I just don't want to waste any unnecessary time." Lei Xiaoyu nodded. "I understand Big Brother Qin's meaning. In the past, my father also used similar methods to quietly scare people. The effect was very good." She smiled, but in the next moment it turned dark. "Qin Yu said, did you forget what you said? As long as you have the confidence, you can return to Rock City. City Lord Lei will definitely be happy to see you. 6 hours later, they arrived at the mark Ban Bu mentioned. It was embedded into a boulder at the summit and had existed there for countless years. The surrounding stone had been corroded, causing the mark to become much fainter. "Senior, it's here." Ban Bu drew back to the side. Qin Yu nodded. "Do you remember where the withered tree is?" Ban Bu immediately understood. "I do. Before the blood moon descends, I will return." He bowed and drew back several steps. With a humming sword, his figure howled far away. When Qin Yu had sensed something was wrong, He had still chosen to delay to save him in order to save time. With just him alone, finding the mark would be far too slow. With Banbu's help, his efficiency would be much higher. As a divine Tao sword cultivator, Banbu erupted with all his strength, and his speed was far faster than Qin Yu's. Lei Xiaoyu jumped down. She had recovered quickly and was able to move freely. Big brother Qin, I will wait for you on the side. Qin Yu nodded. He stood in front of the boulder, lifted a hand and touched the mark. Then he slowly closed his eyes. For hours later, there was the sound of breaking air in the distance. Several cultivators came howling over. They had clearly discovered 2 people near the boulder at the summit. Stop! With a loud shout, the leading cultivator's face darkened. Your bodies have been stained with the aura of the blood moon. You are not new cultivators. Don't you know that this mark concerns our life and death? Even if it is just a strand, we cannot allow it to be damaged. The several people behind him also had ugly complexions. A female cultivator swept her eyes over Lei Xiaoyu, jealousy flashing in her eyes. Big brother, don't waste words with them. The mark he touched can no longer be preserved. We need to teach them a lesson. Lei Xiaoyu retreated to Qin Yu's side. What are you trying to do? The female cultivator sneered. Little girl, you're born with such a seductive appearance. When I cut your face a few times, you'll know what you shouldn't do. Qin Yu opened his eyes. He didn't stop. He stood where he was and turned to look at the several people not too far away. The sneer on the female cultivator's face and the jealousy in her eyes instantly froze. She felt as if she had fallen into an ice cave, and her mind was drowned in fear. She felt that she was standing on the edge of death and would be consigned to eternal damnation at any moment. The cultivators beside her didn't look any better. Their eyes were wide open and their faces were pale. Scram! The formless terror that filled the air dissipated. Several cultivators gasped for breath, not daring to hesitate. They turned around and ran for their lives, disappearing in the blink of an eye. Lei Xiaoyu wrinkled her nose. Humph, a bunch of trash. How dare you act all high and mighty in front of my big brother Qin? I'll teach you a lesson any time. Big brother Qin, are these people bothering you? Qin Yu smiled and shook his head. I'm fine. If it were yesterday, there might have been some trouble, but it's fine now. Xiaoyu, I'll continue. Yesterday, today, to be more accurate, it had only been around 20 hours. If someone else had said this, Lei Xiaoyu wouldn't have believed them, no matter how naive she was. To progress so much in a single day, that was absolutely a lie. But since Qin Yu had said it, she had directly believed him. She felt more and more pleased with herself. As expected, the big brother Qin that she liked was fiercer than everyone else. If such a fierce big brother Qin says that I still have a chance to live, then I really do have a chance. Lei Xiaoyu, you have to work hard. Don't give up. She glanced at Qin Yu and then closed her eyes to cultivate. Every bit of effort she put in would increase her chances of survival in the future. Another 4 hours later, Qin Yu opened his eyes. There seemed to be some enlightenment in his eyes, but he couldn't help but frown. He had grasped the key to the secret of the cleave scar, but he felt as if he were looking at flowers through a fog, as if he were separated by a layer. It was like the final piece of paper on a window. It could break at the touch, but it was hard to find a path. There was no hurry. There were still 3 more days. Qin Yu took a deep breath and drew back his hand. With a loud crack, the cleave scar shattered and dissipated. But this time his fingertips wouldn't be cut by the aftermath of the cleave scar's collapse. This was Qin Yu's progress, but it was far from enough. When Qin Yu could casually touch the cleave scar and it was safe and sound, only then would he be truly enlightened. Xiaoyu, let's go. Whoosh! Qin Yu carried her on his back and soared into the skies. 6 hours later, he smoothly returned to the place where the withered tree was. After another moment, a slightly distressed Banbu howled back amidst the heaven-shaking cries of swords. Qin Yu frowned. With Banbu's cultivation, he was able to restrain his sword intent and didn't reveal such a great commotion. The greater the commotion, the worse his condition was. It seemed that the process of finding a new cleave scar wasn't going smoothly. Pa! Banbu rushed into the tree hole. He stumbled and cupped his hands across his chest. Senior, there was an accident, but I discovered something. His face lit up with joy. Following Qin Yu's will, for hours after Banbu left, in order to avoid a group of monster beasts, he drilled into a hidden cave. This was originally an unintentional action, but he never imagined that he would make a great discovery in the cave. Deep within the cave, there was a giant cleave scar. It was thousands of feet long and sunk deep into the earth. But according to what Banbu said, this was a sealed cave. The top, bottom, left, and right were all sealed off, so he didn't know why a cleave scar would appear there. Qin Yu hesitated for a long time. He slowly said, "How far is it?" Banbu said, "It's a bit far. Senior will have to hurry if we want to return in 24 hours. Qin Yu furrowed his eyebrows. Lei Xiaoyu said, "Big brother Qin, I will wait for you here. It will be fine." Qin Yu thought for a moment. "Banbu, did you leave behind a mark in the cave?" Seeing him nod, he continued, "Give me a sensing technique. Tomorrow, you will stay here and protect Xiaoyu's safety." Lei Xiaoyu opened her mouth, but before she could say anything, Qin Yu waved his hand. It settled. When the blood moon descended, the withered tree still didn't rush to the mountain valley, but its tentacles could already reach within 10 feet of the cave entrance. There were still 2 days until the full moon. As the shrubbery illuminated the world, Qin Yu leapt out from the tree hole. His feet landed on the ground and he held far away. In his hand was the delicate wooden sword that Banbu had given him. There was a trace of sword intent left within it, so he could feel the mark in the cave. It was indeed a bit far. After a full 5 hours, Qin Yu finally arrived at the entrance of the cave. Just by standing there, he could feel a strange fluctuation in the air. This was the aura of a cleave scar. Indeed, Banbu was right. There was a great surprise here. Unfortunately, he didn't have much time left. Taking a deep breath, Qin Yu drilled into the cave entrance. Then, he rapidly shuttled through the darkness according to the response of the wooden sword. A moment later, there was a light cracking sound as the wooden sword in his hand disintegrated. Qin Yu looked up and saw a giant, several thousand-foot long cleave scar reflected in his eyes. With just a glance, a loud ringing sound rang out in the depths of Qin Yu's mind. It was like a long sword had broken through the skies, cutting down mountains and splitting apart seas. The fuzzy feeling that Qin Yu was experiencing from perceiving this cleave scar instantly dissipated. He couldn't help but smile and laugh heartily. With this cleave scar as the object to perceive, he had absolute confidence he could unravel the secrets within. Without further ado, he would immediately begin. Qin Yu sat down cross-legged. His divine sense broke out from his body and fused into the cleave scar. Then he felt as if he had been placed within a boundless sea of swords. Vast and boundless. There was no beginning and no end. The turbulence could submerge and destroy all. At this moment, Qin Yu was enlightened. In this mysterious world, all of the cleave scars that were preserved were created by a super powerhouse of an inconceivably powerful boundary in the ancient past. When that powerhouse raised his sword and slashed down, the sword intent fragments would shatter. As this thought appeared, a horrifying picture appeared in Qin Yu's mind. A boundless sword came from the east, piercing through the boundless sea of clouds, tearing apart the heavens and earth. Everything in its path was cut in half, tumbling and collapsing as it disintegrated. With a stuffy cough, Qin Yu revealed a pained expression. Dark red blood flowed out from every orifice of his head. Although it was only a picture, a sword intent was revealed. Even though it was extremely weak, it still caused Qin Yu to suffer heavy losses. Pa! Numerous wounds appeared on the surface of his body, as if he had been cut open by an invisible sword. Massive amounts of blood gushed out, but even these beads of blood hummed as they fell onto the ground. They were split in half and then shaken into a fog of blood. Time passed. More and more blood fog appeared, becoming increasingly thick. It covered Qin Yu's body, making it impossible to see his figure. There was a great secret hidden within the cleave scar. After unraveling it, one could obtain the good fortune that this secret represented. But at the same time, one would have to withstand a corresponding test. And now, Qin Yu was experiencing all of this. If he could pass this test, he would become the first and only cultivator to perceive the cleave scar in this world for countless years. Otherwise, this cave would be Qin Yu's burial ground. Kacha! Kacha! With a faint sound, the blood fog that filled Qin Yu's body began to freeze. The surrounding temperature began to fall at a terrifying speed. This was because at this moment, in the pitch-black skies, the blood moon had arrived. The slumbering, departed spirits had their shackles of death unlocked. They had been resurrected as the dead. Terror arrived once more. Beneath the illumination of the more perfect blood moon, it endowed them with an even greater strength. The living beings cried out in despair. In order to survive, they began to desperately fight to the death. Nothing was different from before. But if someone stood high in the skies and looked down at the mountain Qin Yu was on, they would discover that with the mountain as the center, the blood-red light for 10,000 miles was far brighter than the surrounding areas. It was like a terrifying eye had opened in the blood moon, its gaze condensing into essence as it stared at the mountain. An invisible will descended within 10,000 miles, entering the bodies of all the resurrected beings. They no longer chased after each other, but turned and gathered around the mountain. 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000. There were so many of them that it was hard to calculate. They rumbled across the earth, stirring up a great cloud of dust. They were like a raging tide of destruction. Among them were black-armored soldiers, withered corpses, and all sorts of strange departed spirits. But the one that attracted the most attention was an incomparably massive black vine with countless branches. It pulled out its own root system. All of its branches wove together, transforming into a 10,000-foot tall giant. Every step it took caused the earth to tremble. Chapter 9:29. Qin Yu hadn't returned. The blood moon had arrived. The withered tree came back to life. It flew into a rage and wildly whipped the earth with its tentacles. It seemed to sense that Qin Yu's aura had disappeared and was enraged by this. Lei Xiaoyu and Ban Bu became the targets of its anger. The blood-red tentacles were just a little bit away from breaking into the tree hole. The light from the slash marks became increasingly bright. If the tentacles were just a little stronger, they could break through the seal. Lei Xiaoyu stood at the entrance of the tree hole. As she looked at the world beneath the blood moon, she subconsciously bit her lips. Banbu glanced at her. Miss Lei, don't worry. Senior Qin's strength is unparalleled. Nothing will happen to him. Lei Xiaoyu nodded. Big Brother Qin will definitely return. Heaven and earth trembled. Large boulders tumbled down with a rumble. The towering mountains that stood tall were being pushed flat by the rampaging, resurrected creatures. They destroyed all that stood in their way, constantly pressing forward. Suddenly, a deep rumbling sound came from deep within the earth. Then, countless cracks appeared on the rock walls. Blinding silver light shot out from the cracks, like countless sword lights. It was like this mountain was instantly covered with millions of slash marks. Puff, puff! The sound of flesh and blood being torn apart rang out. Thousands of resurrected creatures were instantly cut apart by the silver light. Instinctively, fear appeared in their eyes. However, this fear soon turned into endless ruthlessness. At this time, the blood moon that covered the surrounding 100 miles became even brighter. The 10,000-foot tall, withered vine giant roared and smashed its hand towards the rock wall. The silver light was like a saber that directly cut apart the giant's attack. The disintegrating fragments rapidly melted in the silver light as if they were being burned and evaporated. Finally, a thick black liquid was left behind. Roar! The withered vine giant roared in pain. But not only did it not retreat, but it became even crazier. Its other hand continued to smash out. At the same time, more resurrected creatures rushed towards the silver slash marks. They no longer retreated or feared. Even if they knew that advancing meant death, they still didn't turn back. This was because what was driving them was the blood moon above their heads. Because of the existence of the blood moon, they were able to complete their resurrection. Their instinctive obedience suppressed all else. The withered vine giant's body grew smaller and smaller, and the number of resurrected creatures decreased at a visible rate. However, their destruction was not without value. After the resurrected creature's body was destroyed by the silver light, the remaining black viscous goo was increasing. It gathered together like the raindrops in the sky converging into a stream, and then the stream turned into a river, rolling and roaring continuously, setting off waves of black tides. At this moment, the blood moon shone brightly in the sky, and the mountains on the ground shone with silver light. Among them, a black river continuously roared, forming a strange picture. When one looked down and took in the scene, one would instinctively feel endless fear in one's heart. Time continued to pass. 12 hours after the blood moon descended, the light it emitted suddenly increased explosively. The piece that had originally been incomplete was now slowly being repaired. The change appeared once again. Today, the blood moon had become complete. Today was the night of the full moon. Roar, roar. All the resurrected creatures in the mysterious world raised their heads and roared at the sky. Fanaticism and excitement were mixed with bloodthirst and destruction. When the full moon arrived, their strength would rise to an unprecedented peak. Tonight was the time to harvest. All the flesh creatures in front of them would become delicious food. Slaughter descend. In the valley within the circle of slash marks, the cultivators and monster beasts that were desperately resisting the black-armored warriors felt their hearts race with fear. They fiercely looked up and saw the perfect blood moon in the skies. Despair struck their hearts, and their faces filled with despair. The night of the full moon. How could it be the night of the full moon? This is a change that hasn't been seen in 1,000 years. In such a short period of time, it has occurred twice in a row. The heavens want to destroy us. No one can escape, no one can escape. Today we will all die here. Roar, roar. The black-armored warriors reared their heads back and roared. Their bones crackled and popped. Beneath the illumination of the full moon, their bodies rose in size. The sabers in their hands were stained with a faint blood-red color. As they waved them, they actually began to burn. The flames that wrapped around the sabers were blood-red, as if they had been soaked in blood. They were ice-cold without any warmth. Bang! The black-armored warriors crazily rushed out. Their speed and strength increased by more than a level. The cultivators and monster beasts that were defending the gap were instantly killed or wounded. The withered tree crazily roared. At this time, more and more tentacles drilled out from its body and began to burn beneath the full moon. A terrifying aura was released from its body. As time passed, this aura grew stronger and stronger at an astonishing speed. Whoosh, whoosh. With the sound of breaking air, the burning tentacles rushed towards the entrance of the tree hole. Hum! The silent slash scar suddenly erupted with a thunderous cry. The silver light it released rose up once more, resisting the invasion of the tentacles. But Bamboo's face had turned incomparably pale. As a formidable sword cultivator, he could feel the vibrating vibrations of the slash scar. The slash scar was using its own destruction as the price to erupt with an even greater strength. This method couldn't be maintained for long. Once the strength contained within the slash scar was burned away, it would lose all of its might. Kacha! A light sound fell into Banbu's ears like a thunderclap. He froze where he was. He stared at the crack that had appeared on the slash scar. It really came. It was just that this speed was faster than he had imagined. Was he going to die? Banbu gulped. He felt a bitter taste in his mouth. He clenched his teeth and said, "Miss Lei, stand behind me." Lei Xiaoyu shook her head. "You can't stop me." Banbu was stunned for a moment. He immediately sighed. Although her words were direct, they were the truth. On the night of a full moon, Deadwood's strength had risen by more than double. Now that he had injuries that hadn't healed yet, he wasn't his match. Most of the courage he had in his heart was extinguished by these words. Banbu wailed in his heart, Senior Qin, where are you? If you don't come back soon, we will all die here." In his opinion, even if this was only an avatar, as long as Qin returned, there was a chance he could survive. Lei Xiaoyu had a calm expression. Although she was a bit afraid, she was in a much better state than she had imagined. Perhaps it was because she already knew that she didn't have long to live. It was just a matter of dying sooner or later. In fact, she even rejoiced in her heart that Big Brother Qin wasn't here. With his strength, without her dragging him down, even if he encountered a night of a full moon, he would still have a chance to survive. If he died like this, he wouldn't need to suffer anymore, and he wouldn't need to silently tell himself that he had to be strong. Big Brother Qin, it's not that I don't keep my word. It's that the heavens aren't giving me a path to live. Then let's end things like this. When the blood moon was full, the black river suddenly rose. It was like a giant mouth had opened wide, swallowing up the entire mountain. Even the silver light that shot out from the cracks in the mountain was shrouded in darkness and thoroughly extinguished. The black mucus wildly spun, like a giant digestive organ that wanted to grind apart the mountain and absorb everything within it. Gradually, the black mucus rapidly shrank. This was because the entire mountain was rapidly melting away. 10,000 feet, 1,000 feet, 100 feet. As it shrank, the mucus became increasingly black and viscous. In the end, it was reduced to a circle of 10 feet in size. Kacha! Kacha! Sounds of breaking came from within. It was like sharp teeth were tearing at the last layer of armor of prey. At this time, Qin Yu was sitting cross-legged within the 10-feet sphere of mucus. His complexion was incomparably pale, and his aura was weak to the point of almost non-existence. The thick blood-red ice that surrounded him was formed after he had exhausted nearly all of his blood vitality. This was his final line of defense. At this time, the blood ice rapidly broke apart and fell off, becoming increasingly thin. Tiny cracks spread out like a spider web. Perhaps in 10 breaths of time, perhaps in 5 breaths of time, it would break apart. At that time, what awaited Qin Yu was the fate of being melted away by the black mucus. 1 breath of time, 2 breaths of time, 3 breaths of time. At this moment, the flow of time within the mucus seemed to slow down. One could even hear the faint sigh of time passing by. But in the end, this was only an illusion. It followed the flow of the great Tao of the heavens and earth, the eternal flow of time. Like the rain in the heavens, it would eventually fall to the ground. This was their destiny from the moment they were born. Thus, when the blood ice was finally exhausted and the first gap appeared, the black mucus screamed out in excitement. It crazily drilled in and threw itself at Qin Yu's face. It seemed as if it wanted to use his mouth and nose as an entrance to drill into his body and wantonly enjoy the prey it had captured. Shwa! Qin Yu suddenly opened his eyes. The black mucus was only an inch away from his eyeballs, perhaps even a bit closer. Then time stood still. This was true stillness. Besides him, everything else seemed to be sealed in invisible ice. Qin Yu looked up. His gaze seemed to pierce through the black mucus and fall on the endless distance, on the perfect blood moon. As I thought, your goal is me, but I'm sorry, I don't want to die yet. Since I don't want to die, you won't have a chance. After speaking a few words of nonsense, he decisively stopped speaking. He lifted his hand and formed a sword with his fingers, gently slashing upwards. The stillness of time vanished. The mucus screamed, wanting to cross the final inch of distance. But it had already lost its chance. Puff! With a dull sound, the silver light instantly cut through the mucus. Although it was only a small wound, not even the size of a palm, it still carried away all of its strength. In an instant, the mucus disintegrated and splashed in all directions, not a single drop falling onto Qin Yu's body. Then the mucus rapidly withered and disintegrated into powder. With a gust of wind, it vanished without a trace. As for the silver sword light that came from Qin Yu's hand, the one that sent it into destruction, it continued to shoot into the skies without hesitation, howling towards the high and lofty full moon. It seemed to feel that its body was too small and that it would lose face if it fought the full moon. Thus, the sword light began to hum. As if it were being summoned, the countless marks that had existed in this world for countless years and were still intact began to respond at the same time. Hum, hum, hum. One after another, they gathered together until they became a dreadful sound wave that pierced through the eardrums and caused all living beings in the world to feel fear. Pa! Pa! The tens of millions of sword marks shattered, turning into silver light that shot into the skies and fused into the sword light. Thus, its body was like an inflated balloon, inflating crazily. In the blink of an eye, it had grown 100,000 feet. Rumble, rumble. The sword light pierced through the skies, shooting towards the blood moon above, advancing with indomitable will. Chapter 930. Mountain Valley. All of the slash marks instantly shattered and dissipated, turning into silver light that shot into the heavens. There was no longer any obstruction between the living beings that were desperately trying to survive and the black-armored warriors outside. There was a deathly silence. All the black-armored warriors let out excited roars. They flapped their wings and rushed forwards, blotting out the skies. Ah! Several human cultivators that were sitting cross-legged and recovering from their injuries were dismembered on the spot without any preparation. Tree whole, blood-burning, tentacles howled as they broke in. Ban Bu's pupils shrank. He roared and stepped forwards. Although he was terrified, as a formidable sword cultivator in this hopeless situation, he didn't lack the courage to risk his life. He lifted a hand, and a heaven-shaking sword cry erupted from his body. All of the sword intent condensed between his fingers, forming a sword phantom in the air. Bang! There was a heaven-shaking explosion. Ban Bu spat out a mouthful of blood. With the sound of bones breaking, his body caved in and he was sent flying backwards. A massive number of blood tentacles were cut off, but in the blink of an eye, more rushed in. Ban Bu, who was in midair, was instantly submerged by the tentacles. Sword light flashed and was extinguished. Lei Xiaoyu's gaze passed through the blood tentacles and fell on the world outside the tree hole. Big Brother Qin, I hope you can survive. You must survive. The tentacles wrapped around his body. As expected, the burning blood-red flames were as cold as ice without the least bit of warmth. Instead, they emitted an endless chill, like thousands of needles as thin as a cow's hair that pierced into his flesh and blood. He seemed to hear a scream coming from within his body, one filled with fear, despair, and unwillingness. Lei Xiaoyu smiled. She knew that this sound came from the goo bug in her body. After torturing her for all these years, although I haven't been able to defeat you, I can still take you with me to death. Bang! A heaven-shaking explosion rang out from the distant skies. It was like two moving stars had collided together. The dazzling silver sword light suddenly vanished from sight, as if it had never appeared in this world. But it still existed. It had already pierced through the skies, leaving behind its final and strongest strike in this world. In the middle of the sky, the blood-colored full moon that illuminated the entire mysterious world and covered it in blood suddenly split into two. It didn't fall to the ground. Instead, it was like a bubble that had been dyed blood red. The instant it was broken, it dissipated. Endless darkness descended. extinguishing all the color of blood in this world. Therefore, fear appeared in the eyes of all the terrifying creatures that had been resurrected under the blood moon. In the next moment, they maintained their final movements. Their bodies froze on the spot, and the seal of death that had been opened closed once again. Not only that, but because the blood moon had reversed the rules and granted them rebirth, this itself had already violated the great Tao of heaven and earth. When the blood moon existed, they were protected and safe. Now that the blood moon had shattered, the backlash of the great Tao had arrived. What awaited all the resurrected creatures was the fate of being completely erased from the world without leaving a single trace. This was the coldness and balance of the great Tao. It allowed a small number of powerful individuals to possess the qualifications to interfere with the rules. But once this interference was weakened or dissipated, they would suffer the most extreme and ruthless punishment. Whoosh, whoosh. The shrubs that were hiding underground seemed to have sensed the destruction of the blood moon. They crawled out of the ground at the same time and spread their branches and leaves wantonly, sprinkling dim light on the ground. Even though there was no wind, the shrubs still swayed back and forth, as if they were cheering in joy. Qin Yu furrowed his eyebrows, a bit of surprise in his eyes. He swept his eyes around and saw countless dim lights gathering around him like ripples in water. A dark golden light surged in his eyes. Then, the dim light stopped and the phantom of an incomparably massive shrub appeared. It bowed like a person and respectfully bowed. Qin Yu hesitated for a moment. He lifted a hand and the phantom of the shrub dissipated. Then the endless dim lights around him howled and gathered, condensing into a seed-shaped black crystal in his palm. Holding this object in his hand, Qin Yu could feel a mysterious connection between him and this world. It was like a coordinate. No matter how far away he was, he could lock onto this world and directly descend upon it. A fluctuation suddenly spread out in his heart. Then a thought fused into his memories. World key. Condensed from the source of the world. A life form that obtained the approval of the world could borrow the strength of the world to open up a temporary space channel and descend upon this world. This thought came from the jade embryo egg. Qin Yu had already adapted to it. He looked down at the black crystal in his hand, a look of joy in his eyes. With this object, it was the same as having a life-saving card in his hand. Once he encountered a calamity, he couldn't resist. He could open up a space channel and escape to this world. Qin Yu flipped his hand and put away the world key. He cupped his hands together and said, "Thank you." The invisible that lingered around him immediately retreated. Qin Yu stood up. Without hesitation, he turned and stepped away, howling into the distance. His speed was over 10 times faster than before. Faintly, there was a sharp and tyrannical aura that emitted from his body. It was like 1,000 mountains and 10,000 rivers could be pierced through in an instant. But at this time, Qin Yu suddenly discovered that after obtaining the world key, his speed could be even faster. With a thought, the space in front of him began to ripple, and he stepped into it. Lei Xiaoyu's eyes widened. The flames on the blood-red tentacles that wrapped around her body were extinguished, turning back into withered and cracked branches. She hesitated for a moment. Then, she reached out a hand and gently touched it. With a light cracking sound, the branches disintegrated into endless powder. It was like a chain reaction had started. The countless withered branches in the tree hole collapsed and dissipated. Even the tree hole beneath them began to disintegrate. Ah! Lei Xiaoyu cried out. A weak sword light flashed, supporting her body. The powder in the air parted to reveal Ban Bu's pale face. But now his face was filled with joy. We survived. It was Senior Qin. He could already feel that terrifying sword light that shot into the heavens and cut apart the blood moon. That sword light was marked with Qin Yu's aura. Lei Xiaoyu was about to say something when her eyes widened. Then a smile bloomed on her face like a blooming flower. Big Brother Qin. Ban Bu hurriedly turned around. He just happened to see Qin Yu step out from the spatial fluctuations. Before this, he hadn't been able to feel even the tiniest bit of Qin Yu's aura. Then his eyes ached and tears tumbled down his cheeks. He quickly lowered his head, but great waves were already stirring in his heart. At this time, in front of him, Qin Yu was a transcendent divine sword that stood between the heavens and earth. Just the aura he emitted was enough to destroy all. If he had stared at Qin Yu for just a moment longer, he feared his eyes would have been ruined. As he thought, the one who cut apart the blood moon was Senior Qin. At this moment, Ban Bu's respect and reverence towards Qin Yu surged like a raging river. No, it should be called an endless ocean. Qin Yu stretched out his arms and embraced Lei Xiaoyu. He could feel her shivering body and the excitement in her heart. He smiled and said, "It's fine. I'm still alive. We will both be fine." Lei Xiaoyu didn't speak. She only hugged him tighter, after experiencing life and death. Only then could she understand just how beautiful it was to reunite and live together in this world. Qin Yu patted her back. He looked at Ban Bu and said, "You did well." Looking at his current injuries, one could roughly guess what he had done to him earlier. Ban Bu didn't dare to look up. He bowed and said, "It's good that my lord has returned." Qin Yu's thoughts stirred. The sun-moon force field spread out, and the terrifying sword intent around him was immediately isolated from the outside world. Ban Bu let out a long breath. But there was even more respect in his eyes. He was truly worthy of being called a senior. He had just perceived such a dreadful sword intent and was able to freely control it. If he hadn't seen it with his own eyes, it would have been hard to believe. Qin Yu suddenly turned and looked up into the skies. Someone has actually found a way to leave this world already. Ban Bu's eyes widened. Ignoring his sore and swollen eyes, he asked, "Senior, can we leave now?" Qin Yu nodded. "The blood moon has vanished, and the world seal has vanished. As long as the blood sacrifice is satisfied, we can leave this place." He lowered his head and patted the unwilling Lei Xiaoyu. "That's enough. Although the blood moon has been destroyed, we shouldn't stay here for too long. Let's leave as soon as possible." Hearing this, the sobbing Lei Xiaoyu reluctantly took a step back. Even so, her hand still held onto Qin Yu. Qin Yu smiled and flicked his sleeves. "Let's go." Bringing Ban Bu and Lei Xiaoyu with him, he shot into the skies. The endless darkness in front of them was like a pitch-black curtain. But now, in front of this curtain, the phantom of a stone gate was faintly discernible. Its surface shimmered with a faint blood-red color. Throughout the mysterious world, all living beings that had survived were rushing here at the fastest speed possible. As the first person successfully escaped, they could already sense the existence of the exit. But in truth, the exit did exist. But in order to leave this place, they still needed to pass a final test. Die. With a loud roar, a cultivator's body rose up. Black scales covered his body, and his aura rose with it. Across from him, a monster beast screamed out in despair. Its chest was torn apart, and the light in its eyes rapidly dimmed. Whoosh! Its corpse fell to the ground. A fluctuation erupted from the stone gate phantom, wrapping around the black-scaled cultivator. The space around him trembled, and he vanished from sight. And this was only an ordinary scene in front of the stone gate amidst the countless slaughters. This was because the final test to leave this world was to kill an opponent with a similar cultivation. One would live, one would die. The living would leave this place and obtain a new life. The dead would be buried here forever, their flesh and bones fusing into the earth. When a mysterious cultivator ambushed and killed his companions, he was sent away by the stone gate. Then the slaughter between the survivors became inevitable. When Qin Yu arrived, this was what he saw. It was like an Azura battlefield, and it was even more bloody than the slaughter in the mountain valley. This was because everyone knew that the road of life had been opened, and it was right in front of them. As long as they killed a life of the same level, they could step into it. No one would give up. Die! Roars rose up. Wild auras locked onto him, and 3 figures held forwards. These 3 people formed a group and had been lingering outside the stone gate for a long time. As soon as Chinyu arrived, he was chosen by these 3 people. How hateful! We were 1 step ahead of us. I also saw them, but I didn't immediately attack. What a pity! Many surrounding cultivators revealed looks of regret. Chinyu looked up, his eyes calm. There wasn't the slightest sharp light or any fluctuations of strength erupting from him. But this glance caused the hearts of these 3 people to tremble. Bang, 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 without warning. These 3 people with tyrannical auras widened their eyes. Before they could make a sound, their bodies rapidly expanded and they exploded into pieces. Shwa! The battlefield outside the stone gate fell deathly silent. Countless people stared with wide eyes, horror on their faces. Hum, hum, hum. Chapter 931. On the back of the distant mountain, the war between the human clan and the open race was in full swing. After many years of silence, the 2 races started a full-scale war again. Every day, countless human clan cultivators were killed on the battlefield. But none of this could affect the prosperity of the imperial city. It stood tall on the plains, allowing the setting sun to cast an endless shadow on the ground. The sky was not dark yet, but the bustling streets in the city were already lit up with dazzling lights of various colors. On this ordinary evening in the imperial city, a group of carriages was driving on the wide, clean, and majestic street. The leading carriage was the most popular style among the nobles in the imperial city. It had a hollowed-out crystal roof, and the golden badge above the window represented the noble identity of the carriage owner. The guards at the city gate did not dare to stop them at all. They even skipped the inspection and retreated to the side with a flattering smile. However, the guards' eyes were soon filled with astonishment, because at the end of the convoy was a gray carriage, pulled by a lame horse and driven by a dirty old man. His face was full of wrinkles and dust from the long journey. Is this the carriage of the Ding family? The guards were a little hesitant. They glanced at the guards around the convoy. Although they did not approach the carriage, they did not show any intention of driving it away. Forget it. It was better to avoid trouble. Let it pass. After entering the city gate, it was the most famous Chaotian Avenue in the imperial city. The convoy stopped on the side. After a burst of noisy footsteps, a large crowd came from the front of the convoy and stopped outside the last carriage. The famous red plume guards of the Ding family were scattered around. Although they seemed loose, they blocked all possible directions for a surprise attack. Miss Xiaoyu, we have entered the imperial city. I would like to invite you again to stay with me in my mansion. Of course, your elder brother and servants can also stay with you. Ding Hao was a famous playboy in the imperial city. His love affairs were spread in all the major brothels and embroidery shops. Not only did he have a good family background, but he was also a genius in cultivation. His EQ and IQ were both high, and he was willing to spend a lot of money for a beauty. In the imperial city, countless young ladies of noble families and courtesans of brothels fell in love with him. He had done many romantic things, but he had always been alone. He had never heard of any woman who could capture him. But today he was standing next to an ordinary carriage with a face full of deep love on the side of the bustling Chaotian Avenue. Could it be that Lady Xiaoyu in the carriage was a fairy-like beauty who could tame this unruly white jade dragon horse? Many of the young men passing by revealed expressions of joy. They thought to themselves, "You bastard who seduced me and then abandoned me. You finally met your match." There were also a few young ladies who were strolling the streets at night. Their faces changed, and their eyes were filled with sorrow. They felt as if their hearts were being cut by a knife. The bustling Chaotian Avenue became much quieter at this moment. After pausing for several breaths of time, the woman's slightly apologetic voice sounded out from the carriage. "Thank you for your kindness, young Master Ding. My elder brother and I have other plans, so we won't disturb you any longer. In the future, we will thank young master for your help." The disheveled old man glanced at Ding Hao, who was extremely handsome and upright. He swung the half-broken horsewhip in his hand. The lame horse snorted and looked back at him discontentedly. Then it galloped away. Ding Hao watched the carriage leave until it made a turn, left Chaotian Avenue, and disappeared from his sight. He sighed softly. A young man next to him rolled his eyes and said, "Brother Hao, it's the girl's good fortune to have you take a fancy to her. I'll order people to follow her. Within 3 days at the latest, she'll be willing to marry into the mansion. She'll be with you every day." Ding Hao looked calm. He glanced at him and then at the people around him. "All of you are not allowed to disturb Lady Xiaoyu. Otherwise, we can't be friends." "Ding Hao, are you serious?" "100% serious." The corners of Ding Hao's mouth curled up. "I feel that all these years, she is the one I've been waiting for. No matter who Lady Xiaoyu is, as long as she is willing, I can marry her immediately." The carriage turned out of Chaotian Avenue and calmly drove through the alleys of the capital city. The hooves of the lame horse constantly echoed into the carriage. Lei Xiaoyu bit her lip. She glared at Qinyu, who was suppressing a smile. She said with dissatisfaction, "Big brother Qin, I'm going to get angry if you keep this up." Qinyu laughed out loud. No. I just think that this boy called Ding Hao has good eyesight. He can actually see that our Xiaoyu is a natural beauty. Not bad, not bad. This boy has a bright future. Are you sure you don't want to consider him?" Lei Xiaoyu stamped her feet. "Big brother Qin, I'm really angry." Fine. We won't talk about this anymore. It's been a long journey, so let's rest for 2 days. Qinyu knocked on the carriage door. "Let's find a place to stay." "Yes," the driver respectfully said. 2 hours later, Lei Xiaoyu finished washing up and lay down on the bed, peacefully falling asleep. Qinyu stood in front of the bed, calmly looking at her for a moment. Then he reached out to cover the corners of the quilt, turned and left. The transmission array had been destroyed and he had fallen into a strange world. Although it was a daunting experience, he had still managed to obtain a great harvest. But to Lei Xiaoyu, the result was incomparably bad. Perhaps it was because the goo insects within her had been stimulated by that life or death experience, but they had become increasingly restless recently. If they weren't imprisoned, she feared that she wouldn't even last half a year before her vitality was exhausted. Towards Lei Xiaoyu, Qinyu didn't have any romantic feelings, but the more time he spent with her, the more he could feel the pure goodwill she had towards him. Such a good girl shouldn't die like this. Qinyu took a deep breath and let out a breath. He turned to look at the shadows and smiled. "You've come." There was a slight fluctuation in the shadows, and Xiang Shui stepped out. She looked him up and down. "I knew that there must be a reason why scourges can live for 1,000 years. You won't die so easily." Qinyu shook his head. If she wasn't worried about him, then, according to their agreement, she shouldn't have appeared here. But she was so stubborn. This woman, whatever. He wouldn't lower himself to her level. "Qin, you changed the topic. My current status is that of a disciple of Beyond Objects Mountain. You appearing here can be barely explained. Since you've come, you might as well stay." Xiang Shui arched an eyebrow. "I'm still a maid." Qinyu shrugged. "There's nothing you can do about it. Your status has already been decided." Xiang Shui clenched her teeth. "Then you can keep changing." She turned and walked away. "There are several more eyes outside the inn. I'm guessing they're here for you. Qinyu, I really admire you. No matter where you go, you can always stir up trouble." Qinyu smiled. "You're wrong this time. They really aren't here for me. You will know tomorrow." The night passed without any words. Before Ding Hao arrived, the trusted aides that Rock City had placed in the Imperial City had already come to find him. Although Qinyu and Lei Xiaoyu hadn't concealed themselves when they checked into the inn yesterday, they had only shown themselves for a brief moment. For them to be found so quickly proved that Rock City had placed an extremely formidable force here. There were only two people, a man and a woman, disguised as a middle-aged couple. It was unknown what methods they used, but they had managed to stay in a nearby courtyard. "Greetings, Mr. Cheen." The two respectfully bowed, although they didn't understand why the city lord had ordered them to maintain respect towards this junior that hadn't even reached the divine realm. They wouldn't question the city lord's orders. Cheen Yu glanced at them. "Prove your identities." The middle-aged man and woman's hearts chilled. Although they appeared calm, they had long since cultivated an extremely sharp mind after wandering in the darkness for so many years. They instantly knew that this person in front of them wasn't an ordinary person. Even if he hadn't reached the divine realm, he could kill them with a flip of his hand. They hurriedly nodded, and each took out a token. Before Cheen Yu left Rock City, he had communicated with Lei Qianjun. He glanced at the token and nodded. "Wait a moment. Xiao Yu hasn't woken up yet." The man hesitated. "Mr. Cheen, the city lord misses the miss greatly." "I wonder if she is." Cheen Yu said. "She's fine." The man nodded and moved to the side. After another hour, there was a sound from outside. It was said that there was a young master surnamed Ding outside who wished to pay a visit. After Cheen Yu declined, he turned and looked at the door. "Xiao Yu has woken up. You can go in." The two bowed and quickly walked into the room. During this time, there was another sound from outside. It was said that young Master Ding was in the building and that a banquet had been prepared. He hoped to see Mr. Cheen. Cheen Yu raised an eyebrow. This boy's eyesight was quite good. After thinking for a moment, Cheen Yu gave some instructions to the servants and then pushed open the door. Then they stayed and was called outside in. It was quite famous in the Imperial City and had quite a few backers behind it. Thinking about it, it made sense. In the massive Imperial City, there were countless influences that intertwined with each other. It was unknown how many high-ranking officials and nobles gathered here. How could someone who could establish such a large business be an ordinary character? Even so, after Ding Hao arrived, he still had the manager personally greet him. He also ordered the chefs to do their best to serve this young master. The Ding family of the Imperial City, although it wasn't as prosperous as it used to be, it was still one of the great trees in the Imperial City. It was one of the four great clans along with the Shao family, Mo family, and Li family. It had to be known that these were the four great clans of the Imperial City. In the entire Great Chu dynasty, even if one counted the various tyrants that ruled over a region, they were still the peak powers. Ding Hao was a direct descendant and was also a publicly recognized cultivation genius. He was deeply favored by the old ancestor of the Ding family, and his future achievements were limitless. Who dared to rashly offend such a character? One only needed to look at the manager whose face was covered in wrinkles to know his identity. When Cheen Yu arrived, the Ding family's red plume guard had already seen him and allowed him to enter the room. This place looked imposing from the outside, but only after entering did one realize how luxurious it was. Disregarding everything else, just the value of the materials used to decorate this room was enough to leave ordinary cultivators dumbfounded. Ding Hao smiled as he stood up. "Mr. Cheen, you've arrived. Please sit." His smile was warm, without the slightest anger from being refused. The manager swept his gaze over Cheen Yu, surprise flashing in his eyes, but it disappeared in the blink of an eye. He said with a face full of smiles, "Young Master Ding's friend is my outside-in's honored guest. Mr. Cheen's expenses are waived for this trip. Just take it as my apology for not recognizing a true person before." His words showed his level of skill, giving Cheen Yu enough face and flattering Ding Hao. After he finished speaking, he cupped his hands and left the room with a smile, giving the two of them some space to be alone. Cheen Yu's first words left Ding Hao surprised. "I know your intentions, and to be honest, I don't oppose it. In fact, I am even looking forward to it. But Xiaoyu's identity is not ordinary. You will naturally know in 2 days, and then you can decide whether or not to approach her. Ding Hao smiled. Mr. Qin, rest assured that I am sincere. No matter what Miss Xiaoyu's identity is, I will not change it. Qin Yu looked at him. He lightly said, Since you are so determined, then I will remind you. If Xiaoyu doesn't dislike it, you can pursue her. But if she clearly refuses, then you must disappear from her world. Ding Hao's smile faded. At the entrance of the room, the two red plume guards had dark expressions, their eyes ice cold. It seemed that as long as he looked at them, they would attack without hesitation and make Qin Yu pay the price for his words. Ding Hao looked at Qin Yu in silence for a long time. Then he slowly let out a breath. Very well, I agree to Mr. Qin's request. Qin Yu nodded and turned to leave. A guard clenched his teeth. Young master, this person is so rude. Are you going to let him leave? Ding Hao sat back down. He picked up a cup of tea and took a sip. He shook his head. You don't understand. He, Ding Hao, was a direct descendant of the Ding family. Just how proud was he? How could he easily take a fancy to a woman? Chapter 932. Some people said that because of the cruel murder of the Heavenly Punishment Bureau, countless subjects of the Empire were haunted by resentful ghosts and evil energies. As a result, they couldn't be bathed in sunlight all year round. They could only stay in the darkness day after day, never to be freed. Of course, the rumor was false. The reason why it could circulate in the Imperial City for countless years was because it was spread by the Heaven Punishment Bureau. The reason was that this would help increase the mysterious and terrifying aura of the Heaven Punishment Department in the eyes of ordinary people, and increase their deterrence. However, small tricks were small tricks after all. What had truly established the illustrious reputation of the Heaven Punishment Department was its terrifying strength. In the vast Great Chu Empire, no one knew just how many secret agents of the Heaven Punishment Department there were. However, there was one thing that was publicly acknowledged. As long as the Heaven Punishment Bureau wanted to investigate something, the truth would definitely come to light. It was only a matter of time. This kind of investigative ability was naturally even more terrifying in the imperial capital where the Heaven Punishment Department's base of operations was located. Therefore, when the people from Pengqing City met up with Lei Xiaoyu while concealing their tracks, the Heavenly Punishment Bureau had already recorded it. It has been confirmed that Lei Xiaoyu is still alive. She has an expert following her. Our men have yet to find a chance to approach her. The black-robed executioner's voice was cold and indifferent. The entire process of his narration was like a machine, without the slightest bit of his own emotions. After he finished speaking, he bowed to the lords in the hall. After waiting for several breaths of time for no one to ask any questions, he simply turned and left. Xiao Yunhai closed the file and said indifferently, since we were unable to successfully kill Lei Qianjun, this girl will be of greater use if she's alive. I believe that the situation in Peng City will not worsen for a period of time. Another person said, the teleportation formation has been destroyed and swept into the spatial turbulence. You and I both know how dangerous it is. With Lei Xiaoyu's cultivation, it's almost impossible for him to survive. Perhaps we should focus our attention on the expert beside her. He took out a jade slip and lifted his hand to touch it. It split into 7 halos of light that each turned into a scroll. These are the information I ordered people to gather about this person. There is no harm in taking a look. It is indeed quite interesting. Xiao Yunhai flipped through it several times and frowned. The database doesn't have any information on Qin Yu's background. The person who retrieved the scroll shook his head. That's the strange part. Our Heavenly Punishment Bureau patrols the world on behalf of the heavens. We have recorded every expert in a small city, and we update the records once every 3 months. We constantly check for loopholes, but we can't find a single trace. This Qin Yu clearly has a great background and is quite strong. Although he hasn't entered the immortal realm, he should have been famous for a long time. But now, The earliest traces of his appearance were in an ordinary nunnery in the Pengcheng district. It's as if he suddenly popped out from a crack in a rock. Indeed, there is something strange about this Qin Yu. For Lei Qianjun to have him bring Lei Xiaoyu to the imperial city, it is clear that he trusts him greatly. This might be a blind spot that we have yet to touch. We should follow up on it to avoid any slip-ups, another person said slowly. Xiao Yunhai nodded. If that's the case, instruct the department to pay close attention to Qin Yu's movements and also investigate this person's identity. One more thing. Ding Hao, a direct descendant of the Ding family, approached Lei Xiaoyu and seemed to be in love with her. Even though it is only a small matter, the Ding clan is different after all. Should we give them a warning? Xiao Yunhai stood up. There is no need to discuss this matter. You can decide for yourself. After the Ding family received the warning from the Heavenly Punishment Division, they didn't take this matter too seriously. They were well aware of their young master's dissolute ways, even if they were interested in Pengcheng's Lei Qianjuan's daughter for a time. After a few days, the novelty would wear off and they would naturally drift apart. But this matter had alarmed the Heavenly Punishment Division. If they didn't respond, it would seem that the Ding family was too arrogant, even though the Ding family didn't fear the Heavenly Punishment Division at all. After Ding, she finished busying himself with his daily affairs. He thought for a moment and summoned Ding Hao back. The divine seal saint stone was about to descend, and the imperial city had been a chaotic mess recently. It was best to remind him, lest he stir up trouble. After father and son greeted each other, they exchanged some simple words. Ding, she dived straight into the main topic, mentioning the Heavenly Punishment Division's warning and Lei Xiaoyu's identity. Moments later, with a loud bang, the teacup shattered on the ground. Ding Shi's complexion paled. You little beast, your wings haven't even hardened yet, and you already want to overturn the heavens? Ding Hao smiled bitterly. Father, don't be angry. I have my reasons for choosing the daughter of the Lei family. Ding Shi flicked his sleeves and left. You dared to disobey me because of the old ancestor's protection. I will report this matter. Prepare yourself. His cultivation and talent were mediocre. He had his current status largely because of this outstanding son of the first wife. Naturally, he valued Ding Hao greatly. The Lei family of Pengcheng City was a topic of discussion in the manners of the imperial city. Even though they were safe and sound for the time being, since the Heavenly Punishment Division had taken action, it represented the will of the imperial family. Ding Hao couldn't show the slightest sign of a mistake on this matter. Few people in the world knew how old the old ancestor of the Ding family was. He reclined on a soft couch all day long as if he would take his last breath at any moment. But many years had passed and generations of people had died, but he still lived listlessly. In the early years, a fortune teller in the imperial city had looked at the old ancestor of the Ding family from afar and declared on the spot that even if the imperial city was empty, this old ancestor would live to the end. Afterwards, the fortune teller's whereabouts were unknown. Someone had investigated in secret, but after receiving some sort of warning, they finally gave up. As the true old ancestor of the Ding family, his bloodline had flourished and he had produced tens of thousands of descendants. Even now, only a few dozen people were qualified to receive an audience with him. Ding Hao was definitely one of the top-ranked juniors. Many years ago, the old ancestor of the Ding family had expressed his fondness for this grandson. Greetings, old ancestor. Ding Hao bowed respectfully. He knelt on the ground and kowtowed 3 times before standing with his hands clasped behind his back. The old ancestor of the Ding family raised his eyelids and smiled weakly. Speak. You have wandered the world of mortals until now. Why have you chosen the daughter of the Lei family? Faced with the old ancestor's question, Ding Hao naturally didn't dare to use the perfunctory response he had given Ding Shi before. He thought for a few breaths of time and said, Old ancestor, I feel that this woman has great destiny. If I can marry her, I will obtain great benefits in the future. A bright light flashed in his half-closed eyes. The old ancestor of the Ding family lightly tapped the arm of the soft couch. "Are you sure you didn't see wrong?" Ding Hao said solemnly, "I am sure." Lei Xiaoyu, the youngest daughter of Lei Qianjun of Pengcheng City, was pushed by the Heaven Punishment Bureau when she was young. Through confusion ghost of Wuling City, a poisonous insect was placed in her body. This woman has lived to this day because Lei Qianjun has sought help from many sources. But heavens cannot be defied, and she does not have much time left in her. Even so, you still believe that she has destiny and can help you accomplish great things in the future? Ding Hao's eyes flickered. After a while, he took a deep breath. Yes, I still believe that she is the one I should choose the most. A hint of praise flashed in the eyes of the old ancestor of the Ding family. Disregarding his judgment, his grandson's was very firm. Anyone who achieved great things had a firm heart. If one could not even persevere in their own hearts, how could they overcome all obstacles and reach the other shore of success? Waving his hand, he said, "I already know your intentions. Until the holy stone of the divine seal descends, do not see her again. If you still do not change your mind after this matter is over, I will allow this matter." Old ancestor. Ding Shi's expression changed. The old ancestor of the Ding family waved his hand and said no more. The father and son bowed and excused themselves. When the surroundings quieted down, a person walked out from behind the curtain. He wore a long Taoist robe, and his black hair was tied up with a wooden hairpin. He obviously did not try to hide himself and only stood behind the curtain. However, Ding Shi and Ding Hao did not notice his existence from beginning to end. The Taoist bowed and said faintly, since Elder Ding wants to stop him, "Why give Ding Hao hope?" The old ancestor of the Ding family glanced at him. The daughter of the Lei family must have come to the imperial city for the heaven-eradicating abyss. Lei Qianjun must have received some news and wanted to use the original god's corpse to hatch his goo worm. Unfortunately, His Majesty's plan is fated to fail. Once the daughter of the Lei family dies, Ding Hao will understand that everything in this world can only be obtained with enough power. The Taoist sighed emotionally. Elder Ding indeed thinks highly of Ding Hao. The old ancestor of the Ding family smiled. "Back then, you said that I could outlive everyone in the imperial city. You were right, and I have this confidence. However, there are millions of variables in the world. I can live without changing, but I can't guarantee that I will always be able to avoid the invasion of variables. The family is big. We should always prepare for a rainy day and choose a qualified successor. At least, the Ding family can continue its bloodline." The Taoist shook his head. "Elder Ding, you are too serious." The old ancestor of the Ding family closed his eyes. "If I am alive, one word is too much. However, if I die, even thousands of words cannot explain the calamity that the Ding family will have to endure." While the old ancestor of the Ding family was talking about his life and death, a carriage that was completely gold and seemed to be wrapped in flames came from outside the majestic, great Chu imperial city. It was like a giant sun that released heat and light everywhere, tearing apart all darkness and evil. The Li family has bestowed a golden crow carriage to the emperor. The guards at the city gate paled. They knelt on the ground, their foreheads touching the ground. "Greetings, sir." The passers-by all retreated and lowered their heads, revealing reverence and shock. Of the 4 great families of the imperial city, the Ding, the Shao, the Amo, and the Li were the most respected. The first 3 families had the most clansmen and mostly lived in the surrounding areas of the imperial city. Only the Li family, as long as they were talented, would go to the back of the mountain and be stationed at the front lines of the human race. To protect the great Chu dynasty, they would fight with the Opham family in blood. Every year, many of their sons and nephews would die on the battlefield. Because of this, to show the Li family's contributions and their unparalleled loyalty to the imperial family, His Majesty bestowed the Golden Crow carriage from the imperial carriage. It was an unparalleled honor in the Great Chu dynasty. So, even though the Li family only had a group of mediocre juniors and an empty mansion in the imperial city, they still occupied one of the four great families. After so many years, few people dared to offend them, although they didn't know who was driving the Golden Crow carriage to the imperial city today. It was definitely an important person of the Li family. Who dared to be disrespectful? The Golden Crow carriage silently opened by itself, and a single-armed old man with a sword on his back walked out with large strides. His gaze swept the imperial city before him, and amidst his complicated gaze was a trace of pride. A white-clothed young woman followed behind him. Her blade-master clothes were ramrod straight. Her hair was bound with a silver belt, and her expression was indifferent while her entire body emitted an icy cold aura. After she raised her hand and put away the Golden Crow carriage, the young woman followed behind the single-armed old man and walked towards the main entrance of the imperial city with large strides, and she acted as if she didn't notice the shocked gazes in the surroundings. After a short moment, the news of the Li family's direct descendant daughter, Li Hongye, riding the Golden Crow carriage to the imperial city, spread throughout the imperial city like a gale. Although she was only one person, she represented the entire Li family, and it was like an enormous rock sinking into the world, and it was sufficient to cause the undercurrents of rage in the imperial city to surge even more violently. Chapter 933. As the Li family sword fanatic swept through the imperial city with his sword, causing countless sword masters to hate and revere him, Qin Yu and Lei Xiaoyu were enjoying the peace and tranquility after the storm. Outside Tower was indeed well informed. It was unknown how they learned of Lei Xiaoyu's identity. Although no one in the imperial city was optimistic about Rock City's future, she was still Lei Qianjuan's most beloved daughter, someone that even the royal family couldn't do anything to. Her treatment was raised to the highest level, and even the Heavenly Punishment Division no longer bothered Lei Xiaoyu. They certainly didn't want to stir up any trouble. The manager ordered the kitchen to prepare many specialties of Rock City. But what was puzzling was that Courtyard 73 had never made any requests to the kitchen. Instead, in terms of logistics, a massive amount of cooking utensils and food was sent to Courtyard 73. As long as Lei Xiaoyu behaved herself, then let alone these requests, she could even set fire to the house. The manager would give her whatever she wanted with a wave of his hand. Thus, Qin Yu thoroughly enjoyed the so-called good food flowing down like water and all sorts of fine wines flowing into his arms. It was also at this time that Qin Yu discovered that Lei Xiaoyu really did enjoy cooking to begin with. Besides that, she also enjoyed the sense of accomplishment she felt when Qin Yu cleanly ate the dishes she had carefully prepared. Qin Yu asked her about this. Lei Xiaoyu blushed red and said in a small voice that she had a dream ever since she was a child. That was to peacefully find someone to marry, have children, and make delicious food for them every day. She didn't want to be glamorous. She just wanted to be safe. After a moment of silence, Qin Yu rubbed her head and told her that he also hoped to live such a life one day. But unfortunately, this sort of peaceful time would eventually come to an end. As Great Chu's Tian Shu announced that the Divine Seal Saint Stone would arrive in 5 days, the entire imperial city was stirred. Countless young cultivators gathered from all over, their eyes burning with anticipation. But unfortunately, not everyone had the qualifications to bathe in the radiance of the Divine Seal Saint Stone. Thus, a massive examination began under the management of Great Chu's Tian Shu. All cultivators within the borders of Great Chu that hadn't entered the divinity realm had the qualifications to participate. Survival of the fittest, this world was unfair to begin with. The resources obtained by the elites became stronger, and the lowly became even more insignificant. But in reality, the injustice of the world was far from what could be seen on the surface. Any activity that was controlled by anyone with the goal of screening would definitely have loopholes and dark curtains that light couldn't shine through. It was the same for the assessment of the Divine Seal Saint Stone. Even though it had yet to begin, Many people had already gotten their tickets. This was special treatment. Of course, because Qin Yu was with Lei Xiaoyu today, he was also one of the members who enjoyed special treatment. Therefore, for 3 consecutive days, during the busiest and most tense period of the exam, they still stayed in the inn, waiting to go through the motions. On the last day of the examination, he couldn't delay any longer. Qin Yu finished eating the last dish and smiled. We should also go. Lei Xiaoyu was a bit reluctant. She looked around and said, Big brother Qin, stay a little longer. Once we leave, we won't be able to return. After participating in the test, her identity as the beloved daughter of the Peng City Lord would be made public. Naturally, she couldn't continue staying in Luwailu. In order to show their kindness to the experts who were in theft and represented Tianzhou and Mu, even if they weren't here, the imperial city still built luxurious mansions for them. Peng City also had a massive thunder mansion in the imperial city. Qin Yu shook his head. Let's go. Everything that needs to be taken away is already in my mind. There is no need to miss a courtyard. On the surface, the Peng City cultivators had already prepared a magnificent carriage. In the driver's seat sat Xiang Shui and Ban Bu. Pulling the carriage, one was the old horse with a strong personality from Riverwater City, and the other was lame and had an ugly appearance. But at this time, the old horse with a strong personality was constantly trying to get closer, snorting and snorting. But as soon as it revealed the slightest sign, the lame horse would become enraged and open its mouth to bite it. The old horse would hurriedly dodge to the side. Then, after a while, it would snort again and try to get closer, repeating this process over and over again. Qin Yu boarded the carriage. He looked at it with a bit of helplessness and amusement. He patted the window and said, All right, let's go. The 2 horses immediately became well-behaved. They obediently pulled the carriage towards Heaven's Pivot. The Peng City cultivators were secretly surprised. They thought that this Mr. Qin was someone that the city lord thought highly of and even entrusted the young miss to him. He was indeed a bit different. Just now, they had tried many times to make the 2 horses behave themselves. But before they could get closer, they were glared back. That's right, glared back. These 2 horses didn't look like much, but their eyes were so sharp that it made one's hair stand on end. An hour later, they smoothly arrived at Heaven's Pivot. Looking at the sea of people outside the window, Qin Yu couldn't help but frown. On the last day, there were actually so many people. In truth, those that should have come had already come several days ago. But after failing, there would always be people that weren't willing and would try again. There were many people that thought this way, so it wasn't strange for these people to come on the last day of the examination. Qin Yu frowned. He turned his head to look behind him. A sword light howled towards him, stopping in midair to reveal the figure of a female cultivator. She wore a snow-white blade master robe and had her hair tied up with a silver band. Even though Qin Yu hadn't taken a single step out of outside tower these past days, he still recognized her at a glance. The Li family's sword maniac, Li Hongye. Ever since she stepped into the imperial city, she had challenged nearly every day and had yet to suffer a defeat. In fact, no one had been able to force her to erupt with her strongest strength. She could be called the person with the greatest limelight amongst the younger generation in the imperial city. Moreover, the most important point was that Li Hongye had yet to step into the divine realm. There were already rumors that she would borrow the divine seal saint stone as a final test. She would reflect upon the flaws in her swordsmanship and make up for them. That would be the day she would break through her shackles and step into the divine realm. Such a Li Hongye's future achievements could be imagined. She would naturally be the focus of all. The Li family's sword maniac. She really came. To be able to witness the glory of the sword maniac, this trip to the imperial city wasn't in vain. As they discussed, countless gazes gathered, filled with envy and jealousy. Soon, 2 cultivators flew out from Heaven's Pivot. They wore starry robes and cupped their hands together in greeting. Miss Li, please follow us. Li Hongye coldly nodded. She followed the two people into heaven's pivot. From start to finish, there was silence. No one expressed any objections. With the reputation of the sword maniac, this was the treatment she deserved. Before everyone could turn their envious eyes away, there was the sound of breaking air. With a whoosh, the light scattered and Mo Yuan's figure appeared. She cupped her hands together. Heaven's punishment dome. Mo Yuan requests to participate in the assessment. Whoosh! The crowd was thrown into an uproar once more. No one thought that the two most dazzling women in the imperial city would appear one after another. The brilliance of the sword maniac came from her descent like a star and the sword in her hand. Mo Yuan's brilliance came from her status, talent, and merits. Disregarding everything else, it was rumored that Mo Yuan had participated in the death of the great dragon overlord, a super powerhouse of the opium race. Just this point alone was enough to make her an outstanding talent of the younger generation. The two heavens pivot cultivators that sent Li Hongya away flew back once more. After greeting each other, they welcomed her in. Qin Yu looked away and revealed a faint smile. So she was actually so famous in the imperial city. Moreover, he could sense that Mo Yuan's aura was more than twice as strong as it was before. It could be said that she had been reborn. As he thought, while he was improving, the other geniuses of this world didn't stop growing either. If he wanted to maintain his superiority in strength and lead the way, he couldn't be careless in the slightest. Otherwise, he would eventually be eliminated by the times. Lei Xiaoyu blinked her eyes. Big brother Qin, you know Mo Yuan? Qin Yu nodded. I used another identity to interact with her, but she doesn't recognize me now. Don't reveal any flaws. Oh, Lei Xiaoyu nodded obediently. She thought, I won't let her know that Big Brother Qin is Big Brother Qin. You used to be very eye-catching, and now you've become even more eye-catching. You have to hide well. Mo Yuan followed the two into the heavens pivot. After a moment, a new decision was issued. In order to ensure that the assessment was successfully completed, anyone who had participated more than twice and failed would not be allowed to continue. There was a wave of restlessness. Countless cultivators loudly complained. Their eyes filled with unwillingness. But in the end, they all fell silent. Heaven's Pivot's decision must have been approved by the imperial palace and could no longer be changed. Of course, the most important reason was that most cultivators were well aware that they had already failed twice. Even if they were given another chance, their chances of success would be nearly zero. The crowd in front of them began to scatter. Perhaps because they didn't want to leave this stage too early, they retreated to the side and didn't leave. An hour later, Qin Yu pulled Lei Xiaoyu out of the carriage. But at this moment, he suddenly felt a cold and gloomy gaze on him. He looked up and saw who it was. Their eyes met, and Qin Yu's complexion changed. Cui Yongji. Now he was wearing a wide starry robe and standing at the entrance to the heavens pivot. He had actually become a heavens pivot cultivator of Great Chu. He furrowed his eyebrows. When he first arrived at the exit of the mysterious world, he had relied on the world key to kill with a single glance and could even lock onto someone's aura. But he hadn't been able to find Cui Yongji's aura. It was clear he had left ahead of time. Qin Yu even suspected that the first person to sneak attack someone and complete the blood sacrifice was this person. Otherwise, with his severely wounded state at the time, it wouldn't have been easy for him to survive the chaotic battle. Lei Xiaoyu followed Qin Yu's gaze and also saw Cui Yongji. Her complexion changed, and she subconsciously grabbed onto Qin Yu. I'm fine, Qin Yu whispered. Then he stepped forwards. Today, their statuses were different. Even if they met again, it was impossible for them to directly attack each other. Seeing Qin Yu and Lei Xiaoyu approach, Cui Yongji sneered. He said a few words to the people beside him and then turned to leave. Looking in the direction he left, Qin Yu remained expressionless. When the two of them had been on the verge of death, if it weren't for Lei Xiaoyu awakening her control over thunder and forcefully intervening, he feared he would have died. And in order to escape, Chui Yongji must have paid an extremely heavy price. There was already a life or death enmity between the two of them that could not be resolved. If this person left now, it wasn't because he was afraid of escaping. Rather, it likely wasn't simple at all. A cold light flashed in Qin Yu's eyes. He didn't feel any fear in his heart, let alone the fact that Chui Yongji wouldn't give up. Even if he wanted to escape, he wouldn't allow it. It was just that he couldn't kill him for the time being. After we enter, you must follow by my side. Lei Xiaoyu nodded. After verifying their cultivation and obtaining the token, the two of them smoothly stepped into the heavens pivot. Without special treatment, they could only follow the crowd and wait in line for the examination. In truth, the process was quick and simple. The Great Chu had used the Divine Seal Saint Stone as the original and had replicated many smaller versions of the examination stones. It was said that only those who had opened up at least 3 paths to the divinity realm could pass the test. Of course, this wasn't absolute, but in the end, it all depended on one's own strength. Qin Yu smoothly passed the test. Even if he didn't enjoy any special privileges, his strength was more than enough. Next was Lei Xiaoyu. At this time, the examination was temporarily halted. To the outside, it was announced that Heaven's Pivot had temporarily made personnel changes to prevent cheating. A moment later, an indifferent Chui Yongji appeared beside the examination stone. He coldly said, "Continue." Lei Xiaoyu paled. Qin Yu narrowed his eyes. His gaze fell on Lei Xiaoyu. At this time, the air seemed to fluctuate. Chui Yongji glanced at him. "Qin Yu, since you have passed the examination, leave." Qin Yu had no expression. "I was entrusted by the city, Lord, to come here with Miss Lei today. I will naturally leave with her." By mentioning Lei Qianjun, he was putting pressure on him so that he wouldn't act rashly. Chui Yongji's lips curled up. "Good. If you want to wait, then wait." He looked at Lei Xiaoyu. "Don't delay. Begin immediately." Qin Yu nodded. Lei Xiaoyu clenched her teeth. She walked to the examination stone and placed her hand on it. This was a quota that had already been decided beforehand. She had tampered with the token in her hand so that, as long as she approached the examination stone, it would be triggered. Hum, hum, hum. 3 lights appeared one after another, indicating that 3 paths to the divinity realm had been opened. But at this time, Lei Xiaoyu's body shook and she spat out a mouthful of blood. Her complexion paled and the 3 lights on the examination stone rapidly extinguished. Chapter 934. "Stop!" Qin Yu stepped forwards, his aura instantly erupting. "Miss Lei is the beloved daughter of the Rock City Master, so who dares to be insolent?" The Heavens Pivot cultivator hesitated. Chui Yongji sneered. "So what if you're the Prung City Lord? No matter how strong he is still a subject of my Imperial Chu and must abide by the Empire's laws. The descent of the Divine Seal Saint Stone concerns the future fate of billions of cultivators. No one is allowed to cheat. Violators will be severely punished. This is the Imperial Edict of His Majesty of Great Chu, the one who wields the peerless national weapon and authority. What are you standing there for? Take Lei Xiaoyu down." There was a loud cheer. Countless cultivators in the long line revealed looks of resentment. The city lord of Peng City is so impressive, but this is the Imperial City. How dare you behave so atrociously here? You cheated in the examination. There must be a conclusion to this matter, or we will not let this matter rest. Vent my hatred. Over the years, there have always been some vermin who would snatch the spots that we should have. This lord's actions are the true bearing of a subject of my Chu dynasty. I'll surely capture this woman and make her pay the price she deserves." Lei Xiaoyu's body trembled, and her face grew paler. Qin Yu walked in front of her and turned around, shielding her behind him. Sparks exploded in Chui Yongji's eyes, and his voice became even colder. "Qin Yu, you dare to obstruct Heaven's Pivot from enforcing the law. Your crimes are even worse." This was the result he wanted. Lei Xiaoyu's status was high, and she had already obtained the quota by default. Even if she was taken away today, the matter would be left unsettled. What Cui Yongji truly wanted was to use this opportunity to enrage Qin Yu. As long as he dared to show the slightest bit of resistance, he could borrow the strength of heaven's pivot to kill him. Qin Yu's lips curled up. His icy cold eyes revealed a mocking light. He lightly said, "Sir, you keep saying that Miss Lei cheated, but what evidence do you have? What if it's a slander, a frame-up, or even a conspiracy? What should we do?" Heaven's pivot has its own means of inspection. If Miss Lei is truly innocent, I will definitely give her justice. A calm voice rang out, and the sound of footsteps could be heard as several cultivators approached. Dubhe and the others bowed. "Greetings, Grand Star Observatory." The restless and excited cultivators all shut their mouths, revealing looks of awe. The air quieted down. The corner of Cui Yongji's mouth twitched. That damnable junior seemed to have sensed something. Things were starting to deviate from their original course. But even so, he was not afraid. At most, he would give up this opportunity. There would be plenty of time in the future. Qin Yu cupped his hands together. "May I ask who you are?" Gao Xian's simple face was expressionless. Dubhe Grand Observatory, Gao Xian. Qin Yu said, "You can make decisions." Gao Xian glanced at him. Yes. There seemed to be stars circulating in his eyes, giving off a mysterious feeling, as if he could see through all the secrets of the world. Unfortunately, the Qin Yu in front of him seemed to be wrapped in endless fog. No matter how profound his eyesight was, all he could see was a blur. He subconsciously furrowed his brows. Qin Yu cupped his hands together. "If that's the case, then I ask the Grand Star Observatory to step forward and restore Miss Lei's innocence." He turned and drew back to the side, giving her a reassuring look. Gao Xian retracted his gaze, raised his hand, and pressed forward. Resplendent starlight erupted from his hand, enveloping Lei Xiaoyu within. After a few breaths, he raised his eyebrows and slowly said, "I haven't found a way to cheat." Cui Yongji didn't panic. He bowed respectfully. There are countless ways to observe the stars in the world. The best way to test it is for Miss Lei to try again. If she can once again form a connection with the assessment stone without revealing any abnormalities, I will willingly accept the punishment. Gao Xian nodded. Of course. Lei Xiaoyu bit her lips. But at this time, Qin Yu's voice sounded out in her ears. Don't be afraid. Just step forward. Her heart calmed down. Lei Xiaoyu took a deep breath. I ask the Grand Star Observatory to clear my name. She walked to the side of the assessment stone and pressed her hand down. The moment her palm touched the stone, there was a buzzing sound as 3 lights lit up. Then, after a breath of time, a 4th light appeared. Cui Yongji's eyes widened, disbelief on his face. His first thought was that this was impossible. He had already obtained information about Lei Xiaoyu. She hadn't even opened up a single road to the divine realm. So how could she possibly trigger a reaction? Could it be that she had another token on her body? Gao Xian's eyes blazed like torches as he looked at Lei Xiaoyu. He could faintly feel that something was wrong, but he couldn't sense anything. This was because this was indeed a strength that came from Lei Xiaoyu's body. There was no mistake about it. Lei Xiaoyu drew back. Grand Star Observatory. Gao Xian's eyes drooped. Cui Yongji, your judgment was wrong. Apologize to Miss Lei. Hold on. There was a loud shout. A Rock City cultivator ran over, his face full of shame as he bowed. Miss, I came late and caused you to be alarmed. Once this matter is over, I will ask for punishment from the city lord. He turned, his voice icy cold. Grand Star Observatory, just how honored is my family's Miss status? Do you think an apology is enough to resolve this humiliation today? For roads to the divine realm. Lei Xiaoyu had quietly opened up 4 roads to the divine realm. And this was under the premise that the miss had suffered from a serious illness when she was young and had yet to recover. Stationed in the imperial city, Dan Hong, the public face of Rock City, felt that he had finally found the reason why the city Lord valued Lei Xiaoyu so highly. His family's miss was a true cultivation genius. If Lei Xiaoyu could recover from her injuries, her future would be limitless. Quietly, Lei Xiaoyu's importance in Dan Hong's heart increased by 10 times. He certainly wanted to take this opportunity to fiercely express his loyalty in front of the miss, not even hesitating to offend Tianshu. Grand Star Observatory did indeed have a high status, but so what? He was a trusted aide of Rock City. In this massive imperial city, he was an anomaly. As long as the city lord was safe and Rock City was as stable as Mount Tai, no one would dare move against him. There was no need for him to feel any scruples. Gao Xian frowned. "What do you want?" Dan Hong was about to speak when he suddenly paused. After several breaths of time, his complexion became even colder. "I suspect that the miss was plotted against by someone just now, and the one who did it was him." Chui Yongji sneered. "What nonsense! In front of everyone, when did I do anything? Grand Star Observatory is here. So even if you are a subordinate of Rock City, you shouldn't be too insolent." Gao Xian remained expressionless. If there is no evidence, then even if Lei Qianjun were to personally appear, he wouldn't be able to save you. Dan Hong sneered. He turned and moved to the side. "Mr. Qin, I ask that you step forward." Shua, many eyes gathered. Chui Yongji's heart shrank. Although he had absolute confidence in his own abilities, he still felt a trace of fear when facing Qinyu. Qinyu said, "Grand Star Observatory, so what if you have evidence?" Gao Xian said, "You will be severely punished." "Good. I ask Grand Star Observatory to verify whether or not my Rock City has falsely accused Mr. Chui." Qin Yu lifted a hand and patted Lei Xiaoyu. Several wisps of black energy instantly shook out from her body. This thing seemed to have a mind of its own as it screamed and fled towards Chui Yongji. At this point, there was no need for further words. Whoosh! In an uproar, countless cultivators widened their eyes, all of them filled with disbelief. If even Dubhe, the one who managed the examination, was so dark, then how could this examination be trusted at all? The entire audience fell deathly silent. Gao Xian's complexion paled. The cold light in his eyes wished he could freeze Chui Yongji. "Take him down." Chui Yongji sighed inwardly, deliberately revealing a look of panic. This subordinate pleads guilty and is willing to accept punishment. Qin Yu glanced at him and lifted a hand. "Grand Star Observatory, I was entrusted by City Lord Lei to bring Xiaoyu to the Imperial City. Now that she has been injured, I ask that you give me a chance so that I can personally take revenge." Shua! The atmosphere changed once more. Many people's eyes widened. They thought that these people from Rock City were actually so fierce. Not only did they overturn a Dubhe cultivator, but they also wanted to take revenge themselves. Although this was pleasing, they didn't place Dubhe in their eyes at all. Moreover, Gao Xian's Grand Star Observatory's attitude had always been firm and unyielding. He had even slapped down the face of the 4 great families of the Imperial City. As expected, Gao Xian revealed a displeased expression. He coldly said, "I will deal with Dubhe and give Miss Lei an explanation. There is no need to speak of anything else." Qin Yu lightly said, "Grand Star Observatory, I believe you are well aware that after today's events, it will inevitably deal a blow to Dubhe's reputation. If my Prunk City doesn't let it go and make a big fuss about this matter, this blow will be multiplied." Facing Gao Xian's increasingly cold eyes, Qin Yu's speed didn't change. He continued to say, "Today, I do not request that Mr. Chui be taken away. As long as he can withstand a single strike from me, no matter what the result is, I guarantee that Rock City will not pursue this matter any further. I can even cooperate with Dubhe to minimize the impact. I wonder what Grand Star Observatory thinks. Gao Xian stared at Qin Yu, nebulas swirling in the depths of his eyes. He didn't believe that Qin Yu proposed this on his own initiative because of Dubhe. This person must have some other plan. But Qin Yu's cultivation hadn't reached the divine realm. Even if he had some cards in his hand, could he really kill someone with a single strike? Cui Yongji shouted out loud. Grand Star Observatory, because of my personal grudge with Rock City, I attacked Miss Lei in a moment of confusion and ruined the reputation of my Dubhe. I am filled with incomparable regret and fear. I ask Grand Star Observatory to give me a chance to make up for my mistakes as much as possible. In the world of the Blood Moon, he had once fought Qin Yu in close combat. This boy was truly a monster. He hadn't even entered the divine realm, but he was already ridiculously strong. He didn't dare to fight him head-on, but if it was just a single strike, Cui Yongji naturally wouldn't fear it. Gao Xian let out a long breath. All right, I agree. He flicked his sleeves, and starlight sprinkled down, freezing the void. Li Hongya was expressionless. She indifferently looked into the distance. What was happening left the two Dubhe cultivators embarrassed. Who is this person? Hearing her question break the silence, the two Dubhe cultivators relaxed. They hurriedly said, Miss Li, please wait a moment. After inquiring, one of them said, This person's name is Qin Yu. He comes from Rock City. Li Hongya's thoughts stirred. She suddenly thought back to several months ago when she was in Rock City. She had felt the residual shock waves of a cultivator shaking the heaven and earth dragon gate. At that time, she had told her teacher that if this person appeared in the imperial city, she would cut him down with her sword. Today, it was a cultivator from Rock City, with a cultivation that hadn't reached the divine realm. He actually dared to make such a request. Just how arrogant was he? For some unknown reason, Li Hongya's sword heart began to stir. She was filled with curiosity towards what would happen next. She was a bit surprised by this, but soon composed herself. Since she was curious, she would continue watching. Once she learned the result, she would no longer be curious. Chapter 935. Almost at the same time that Sword Maniac asked this question, Mo Yuan also asked the Heaven Pivot cultivator the same question. Rock City, Qin Yu. She thought to herself. Deep in her eyes, there was a trace of surprise. She didn't know why, but after seeing this person, she felt a sense of familiarity. But no matter how she searched through her memories, she couldn't find any trace of him. This situation caused Mo Yuan to gradually frown. Her expression fell into the eyes of the Heaven Pivot cultivator beside her. He immediately smiled and said, Miss Mo, there is no need to worry. With this person's cultivation, he won't be able to stir up any waves. Before entering the divinity realm, all were mortals. The difference in life levels was like the difference between the heavens and earth. Only someone as strong as Mo Yuan or Sword Maniac Li, who was in another building not far away, could fight someone of a higher cultivation level. But such an existence was like the dazzling stars in the skies of the great Chu Empire. They were peerless geniuses that rarely appeared. How could Qin Yu compare to them? Hearing this, Mo Yuan's eyebrows furrowed even tighter. There was a trace of unhappiness in her heart. This inexplicable change in her mood left her stunned. She took a deep breath and slowly exhaled. Let's continue watching. At this time within Heaven Pivot, everyone's attention was gathered. Qin Yu cupped his hands together. Mr. Cui, I will make my move. Cui Yongji coldly sneered. Good. With a step, the ground rumbled as if a mountain were crashing down, causing the frozen void to tremble. Qin Yu lifted a hand and pointed out a finger. Gao Xian's eyes brightened. No wonder this person dared to make such a request. His strength was truly astonishing. Although he hadn't entered the divinity realm, the might of this strike wasn't weak even amongst those at the divinity realm. This strike might cause Chui Yongji's blood to tumble, but at most he would suffer some injuries. Was this the result that Qin Yu wanted? Gao Xian frowned. Although everything was in his eyes, his intuition told him that things weren't as simple as they seemed. Within Li Hongya's body, the cry of a sword echoed out. A look of surprise appeared in her eyes. It was him. It was actually him. The world was truly vast, and there were actually so many coincidences. Although Qin Yu had just pointed his finger and hadn't released its full might, she was certain that he wasn't wrong. Indeed, as her teacher had said, the aura of this supernatural power was extremely mysterious. Even with her sword heart cultivation, she still couldn't grasp all traces. But even so, it was not difficult to estimate the approximate power. It might be able to injure ordinary immortal realms with this attack, but it was not enough to do more. Unfortunately, even though the divine ability was exquisite beyond compare, it was like casting pearls before swine. This person's strength was limited, unable to display the power he should have at all. If that was all, he would only be worthy of her looking at him a few more times. He was not worthy of her drawing her sword. Chui Yongji's tense heart suddenly relaxed. As he thought, even if Qin Yu had cards in his hand, they were still within a controllable range. Although his strength had not fully recovered, it was not difficult for him to block this attack. At most, he would spit out 2 mouthfuls of blood. If so, he had to thank Qin Yu for giving him a chance to salvage the situation. Otherwise, if he wanted to extricate himself from this matter today, he would have had to expend even more energy. Exhaling, Chui Yongji raised his hand and pressed forward. A blazing light erupted. It was actually a kind of blazing starlight, like the light of the sun in the sky. Grand sun-raging flame, I didn't expect Deacon Chui's cultivation to have reached this level. My heavenly pivot secret art condenses the light of the sun. My attacks are extremely domineering, and I've never lost to anyone in a head-on clash. With this attack, it is more than enough to protect himself. This Qin Yu will only be a joke. The surrounding heavenly pivot cultivators all let out sighs of relief. Although Chui Yongji was in the wrong, their positions had already been decided. Cut! With a loud shout, Chui Yongji thrust his hands forwards. The blazing light of the sun rumbled through the skies like a rainbow. Dan Hong's complexion was ugly. When he received Qin Yu's sound transmission, he had changed his stance and cooperated with him. Who knew things would turn out like this? If he ended up like this, Rock City would surely suffer a great loss of face. He feared that the city lord would blame him for his incompetence, and his hopes of flattering Lei Xiaoyu would fall through. Thinking of this, Dan Hong couldn't help but curse inwardly. If you don't have a diamond, why are you doing this? You are simply harming others and yourself. But at this time there was a loud cracking sound in his ears. Although it wasn't loud, it set off great waves in his heart. It was like he had been struck by a bolt of thunder. Dan Hong fiercely looked up. Then he subconsciously opened his mouth and his eyes widened, making one worry that his eyeballs would pop out of their sockets in the next moment. The dazzling light of the sun, which exuded a scorching aura and caused one's heart to palpitate, actually burst like a bubble before everyone's eyes. That's right, with that light sound just now, it had broken into countless pieces. Each piece tumbled in the air before rapidly dissipating. Chui Yongji's heart nearly stopped beating. The cold mockery in his eyes froze and then turned into endless fear. Without any hesitation, he howled out loud. All of his aura crazily erupted and he rapidly drew backwards. But all of this didn't seem to have much meaning. Chui Yongji's retreating body froze, and his chest instantly caved in. Then his crushed flesh, blood, and organs tore through his back, forming a hole that pierced through his chest. If this was it, then to a divine realm cultivator, this would only be considered a relatively serious mortal wound that could be healed after some time of rest. But the most terrifying aspect of this hole wasn't that it killed or injured Chui Yongji. but that it pierced through some sort of perfectly sealed force field around him, exposing his true aura that he had been trying his best to hide. The moment this aura appeared, it was like ink being poured into clear water. It spread outwards, forming a tumbling black fog around his body. At the same time, it released a een chill that all cultivators could clearly feel. This scene caused everyone that had been shocked by Qin Yu's attack to instantly regain their composure. Their eyes widened and shock filled their faces. Great Tao Plunderer! He is a great Tao Plunderer! This was the first time Qin Yu had heard of this title. Although he didn't understand the meaning behind it, he could tell from everyone's reactions that his goal had been achieved. From the start, he knew that unless he used the formidable sword intent he comprehended in the world of the Blood Moon, it would be impossible for him to kill Cui Yongji in a single strike. But when it came to killing someone, there were always many ways to accomplish it. If he didn't have a chance to face it head-on, then he would just have to change his way of thinking. Cui Yongji did his best to hide his aura, and this aura caused Qin Yu to feel incomparably disgusted and ominous. If so, then there must be a problem, and now it seemed that his guess was correct. Qin Yu stepped forwards and drew back. He had done what he needed to do, so there was no need to do anything else. For things like enemies, it was fine as long as they smoothly died. Whether or not he killed them with his own hands, in his opinion, he could accept it. Gao Xian attacked. Without hesitation, he lifted a hand and grasped forwards. The frozen space instantly contracted, imprisoning Cui Yongji within. His expression was dignified and his eyes were filled with shock. He clearly didn't expect that there would be a great Tao plunder hidden within Heaven's Pivot. He absolutely could not allow Cui Yongji to live. Otherwise, there was a high chance that he would be used by others to attack Heaven's Pivot, causing the situation to expand without limit. Killing intent surged in Gao Xian's heart. He shouted out loud, "In my great Chu territory, all great Tao plunders are to be executed on the spot upon discovery. Die!" Bang! The distorted space violently collapsed. Cui Yongji's shrill screams echoed out from within. He glared at Qin Yu, the hatred in his eyes nearly tangible. Even at this moment, he still couldn't believe that things had developed to this point. But it was clear that after his true identity was exposed, today was the day he would die. Let alone facing the grand observatory star, he had no confidence he could escape. And even if he could, he would still be executed by his master. Qin Yu! Qin Yu! Cui Yongji roared towards the sky, and the rolling black gas around him erupted with a loud rumble. It turned into a raging black flame and burned wantonly. Ka-cha! Ka-cha! The spatial shackles that were strangling him shattered inch by inch, turning into countless specks of starlight that dissipated. Since this was a hopeless situation, he didn't hesitate to pay any price to drag Qin Yu down with him. Otherwise, he wouldn't be willing. Even if he died, he wouldn't be willing. Gao Xian's face was gloomy. He lifted his hand where Dubhe was, and the skies darkened. The images of the sun, moon, and stars appeared, sprinkling down millions upon millions of rays of light. The Grand Star Observatory was the highest title of Heaven's Pivot. In the entire Great Chu Empire, there were only 3 of them, and each one had a peak divine realm cultivation. By borrowing the power of the stars in the heavens, they could even erupt with strength that surpassed their own limits. At this moment, when Gao Xian made his move, it was clear that he was truly angered. The entire imperial city could clearly sense the rage of a great observatory. They all turned to look. With Cui Yongji's cultivation base, even if he risked his life, he would still stand a chance against an enraged Grand Star Observatory. But what was surprising was that he was a Heaven's Pivot cultivator to begin with. What he cultivated was the starlight wondrous art, and his attainments in it weren't low. Within the pitch-black flames, golden motes of light suddenly appeared. They were like burning stars in the dark skies. The endless images of the sun, moon, and stars in the skies locked onto Cui Yongji. For a moment, there was a hesitation and fluctuations. For the grand stargazer, it only needed a single thought to lock onto the target once more. But this required time. Even if it was only a brief moment, it was more than enough for a divine realm cultivator who was burning himself to the limit. All of the black flames were instantly drawn back into his body. Chui Yongji's body suddenly grew in size. Blue veins bulged out from his exposed flesh and blood. They wriggled and shivered as if they would break apart at any moment. Qinyu! With a loud roar, like the howl of a demon from the 9 nether hells, the space around Chui Yongji instantly collapsed. In the next moment, he appeared in front of Qinyu and pointed a finger without hesitation. This finger fell towards the point between Qinyu's eyebrows. It contained all of his strength and the hatred in his heart. He wanted to destroy Qinyu and himself together. The so-called great plunderers were those who had sealed off their own path of cultivation. Because of this, they cruelly killed others and extracted their great Daos to fuse into themselves to forcefully increase their cultivation. However, this method was evil and sinister, not tolerated by the heavens and earth's great Daos. Once a cultivator stepped onto this path, they would suffer the wrath of the heavens and earth after they died. Their soul would disintegrate, unable to exist in the world, and their flesh and blood wouldn't be able to return to the earth. From the moment he took this step, Chui Yongji knew that this day would eventually come. But now he still had unfulfilled wishes. He had patiently waited for so many years, and just as he was about to see hope, it had been destroyed. Chui Yongji's hatred towards Qinyu reached deep into his marrow and soul. Then, let's die together. Qinyu's eyebrows shot up and a cold light flashed in his eyes. The reason he didn't want to personally kill someone was because he wanted to avoid being discovered by others. He was the one who broke open the world of the Blood Moon, and although he had already left for some unknown reason, there was always a gloomy feeling in his heart. It was like when he cut apart the Blood Moon, he had already been marked, becoming the prey of some unknown existence in the dark. So, after Qinyu's sword cut apart the Blood Moon, he tightly wrapped up that sword intent with the sun and moon force field, not letting it leak out into the world. He glanced at Gao Xian from the corner of his eyes. He was sure that this grand observatory definitely had a way to stop Chui Yongji from attacking. But it was clear that he didn't want to do so. That was right. Whether Chui Yongji lived or died today, because of Qinyu's existence, Dubhe's reputation had been thoroughly destroyed. As the Grand Observatory, one of the symbols of Dubhe's authority, how could he not hate Qinyu? Perhaps this was how fate played tricks on people. In the world, there were always 80 to 90% things that didn't go according to one's wishes, and most of them went against the Tao. Qinyu closed his eyes. He lifted a hand and 2 fingers formed a sword edge. Then he cut down,